The tattooed guy irritably took a drag from his cigarette and muttered curses that the delivery guy was insanely late. He looked at his phone screen in annoyance and sarcastically remarked that the diner was too slow and the youth these days were absolutely terrible. Standing up with an air of self-importance, he began lecturing about a society full of deceit where no one bothered to do their duty properly. His hand gripping the baseball bat tightly, he interrogated the victim, asking if the world would be prosperous if everyone was professional. His gaze drilled into the boss, who was tied upside down, as if wanting to force the other man to agree with his viewpoint. He smirked smugly and asserted that he was merely executing his mission as a highly responsible worker. Looking at the miserable state of his prey, he contemptuously declared that it was the lack of professionalism that caused the old man to be abandoned and left to die. He swung the bat to build momentum and coldly threatened the victim not to move if he didn't want death to come earlier than planned. Ignoring the groans, he growled, repeating the order from his superiors that he must beat him to a pulp before officially finishing him off. Just as the murderous blow was about to land, a stranger appeared at the doorway and boldly announced that the package had arrived. The boss turned around with a contemptuous look, sarcastically saying that the sluggish piece of trash finally decided to show up. He narrowed his eyes suspiciously behind his sunglasses, growling to ask just what kind of person this strange guy was. Standing before the guy in the brightly colored jumpsuit, he wondered how a lowly deliveryman could bypass his guarding subordinates to slip all the way in here. Facing the aggression was a terrifying silence, as the black visor on the helmet completely concealed all of the opponent's expressions. Ignoring the murderous glares, the delivery guy silently walked into the middle of the room with his heavy cargo box. He slowly knelt down to open the lid of the box, a bizarre action that added extreme tension to the atmosphere. Without a hint of fear, he began pointing his finger to count the number of enemies, leaving the boss and his subordinates merely staring at each other in bewilderment. His fingers gliding quickly over the payment terminal, he casually calculated the extra charges for those carrying weapons and the late-night service fee. The tattooed guy frantically swung his baseball bat, screaming and demanding to know what the hell this reckless fool came here for. Surrounded by enemies, the delivery guy boldly declared that the package he brought today was a battle. The delivery guy stood calmly amidst the encirclement, boldly declaring his purpose for coming here was to take everyone down and claim his rightful compensation. In response were murderous glares and a cold assertion from the gangsters that they had no personal grudge but were just doing their job. Swearing that it was all just garbage talk, the thugs frantically swung their weapons and charged into attack with the intention of finishing off the reckless fool immediately. He swiftly spun around and delivered a powerful roundhouse kick, launching the heavy metal box high into the air to gain an advantage. The iron block soared through the air and smashed right into the face of the vanguard, the impact so strong that it made him collapse on the spot. Another tattooed henchman took the opportunity to close in from behind, gritting his teeth and swinging a knife aiming straight for his head in a vicious stab. But with godlike reflexes, he managed to raise his hand in time to tightly grab the opponent's wrist, causing the blade to halt completely midair. Right before the enemy could even gather his wits, he threw an iron punch aimed straight at the gangster's ribs to end the fight. The terrifying power from the explosive strike shattered all defenses and caused the opponent's chest to almost collapse entirely. The muscular body of the thug flew like a bullet, crashing violently into the far corner of the wall before the horror of the remaining men. The young delivery guy eagerly urged the opponents to wrap things up quickly so he could make it in time for his next order. Fist clenched with majestic authority, he challenged the entire gang of henchmen to rush in all at once to save time. Witnessing the sheer dominance of the opponent, the boss could only scream in pain and helplessness as he watched his subordinates get completely dismantled. Sweating profusely, he terrifyingly asked himself where on earth the monster wearing that bright jumpsuit came from. Standing frozen in the face of overwhelming power, he hollered that what was happening fell entirely outside the rules of normal logic. In a state of panic, he desperately tried to ask who the mastermind was and how much money they spent to hire a professional assassin like him. He desperately made an offer to pay double, or even triple the contract's value, just hoping he would spare his life. But the response to that bribery was a thunderous punch right to the face, making the boss instantly collapse. Standing tall in the middle of the scene, he coldly stated that betraying a customer would severely violate the terms of service. Without wasting another second, the shipper bent down and began cleaning up the aftermath to complete his delivery mission on time. The delivery guy held up his phone to take a selfie, giving a triumphant thumbs up next to the boss he had just defeated. The camera flash flared up, capturing the pathetic scene of the defeated man as solid proof of completing the order. After sending the confirmation photo, he calmly checked his device and muttered about having to quickly move to the next location. His eyes suddenly stopped at the client, who was still hanging upside down and continuously letting out muffled cries beneath the gag. He approached and decisively ripped off the duct tape, allowing the man to breathe and let out his first cries for help. Upon being freed, the guy started screaming, blaming him for the delay, and ordered him to quickly untie him because he was about to pass out. Standing before the arrogant shouting of the man in peril, he just listened silently with an emotionless face behind his protective visor. He casually replied that a rescue was completely out of the order's terms and the guy couldn't demand more. Despite the desperate screams and curses from the abandoned man, he still coldly turned his back and walked away to continue his job. To silence the annoying noise, he roughly shoved the gag back into its original place, officially ending all hopes of the man in the middle of the night. Lee Sang left behind a business card bearing the name Delivery Paradise, and advised that if there was any work, to send him an official request. With a sharp, cold look revealing from behind the helmet, he asserted that he would accept all combat-related orders as long as the pay was attractive enough. A new order notification popped up on his phone screen, kicking off a familiar work process from the step of accepting the order, to the fierce battles that dyed his black gloves in blood, where strength was the only tool to accomplish the mission, and ending with receiving wads of blood-stained cash, a well-deserved result for someone practicing professionally. The 2-year period of plunging into this dangerous line of work had gone by for a high school student like him. Lee Sang casually strolled down the school hallway, hiding his formidable real combat skills behind the facade of an ordinary male student. With a massive income far exceeding the age of 18, he confidently admired himself through his phone camera while at his peak form. He started calculating for grander plans as he focused on checking important information online. Lee Sang's ultimate goal was to gather enough money to own a luxurious apartment at Seoul Tower Palace before stepping into his 20s. Lee Sang frowned at his phone, unable to help feeling dizzy at the insane escalating speed of current real estate prices. Right at that moment, a deposit notification from the delivery system rang out, indicating that a fee of over 1 million won had officially arrived. Even though his account held an accumulated balance of tens of millions of won, he still wasn't truly satisfied with the current figure. Standing with his back against the hallway window, he thoughtfully realized that even if he worked his whole life, the goal of buying a house in Seoul was still too far out of reach. He told himself that lately he had been falling into an order drought, causing his savings roadmap to slow down significantly compared to the estimate. His eyes flashed with calculation as he considered having to soon find another part-time job to quickly make up for the shortfall. Looking up at the ceiling in utter boredom, he sighed out loud that if only money could naturally fall from the sky onto his head. While deep in thought, he suddenly stopped short upon witnessing a girl being pathetically shoved down right in the middle of the school walkway. His eyes became cold and full of annoyance upon seeing the bullying scene disrupting his personal peace. The fat male student and his gang of henchmen were surrounding the victim, tossing fake sarcastic remarks about the girl's weakness before the eyes of everyone. The fat male student laughed hysterically in triumph, judging his recent move as a sweet act of getting acquainted. The victim still stubbornly sat on the hallway floor, her blazing red eyes glaring fiercely at the one humiliating her. That unyielding expression immediately angered the boss, making him roar aggressively upon seeing himself being looked down upon by a girl. He delivered a ruthless running kick toward the girl, scolding that it was time for her to wake up and face the harsh reality. Standing tall and imposing, he viciously brought up the tragedy of her broken family and the massive pile of debt she was bearing. Moving closer with a perverted face, he casually stated that his demands were actually nothing out of line. Flashing a disgusting smile, he blatantly made a demand forcing the poor girl to submit and become his woman. The girl's eyes grew even sharper, silently affirming that no matter how much money she was paid, she would never accept a guy like him. Just as the male student was fired up, a cold call from behind caused the entire gang of lackeys to startle and turn around in annoyance. Lee Sang quietly stood blocking the way in front of the girl, issuing a firm demand forcing the fat male student to open his mouth and apologize immediately. The underling standing next to the fat male student couldn't help but be shocked upon hearing the arrogant challenge coming out of Lee Sang's mouth. He panicked and rushed over to stop his boss, desperately begging him not to foolishly mess with someone he shouldn't mess with like him. The lackey's face broke into a cold sweat as he asserted that even the upperclassmen had to be wary of Lee Sang, urging the guy to quickly apologize and get it over with. Contrary to his underling's worry, the fat male student just smirked in contempt and affirmed that he had no intention of backing down. He aggressively approached Lee Sang, dropping a highly provocative, sarcastic remark asking what kind of big deal he was to step up and play the hero saving the beauty. Lee Sang looked at the opponent with a cold gaze, casually asking back what right he had to stand here and order him to do this or that. His ego touched, the fat guy suddenly pulled out a sharp knife and threatened to teach the stubborn fool the lesson of a lifetime for daring to glare at him. He glared with murderous intent, roaring frantically that he would gouge out the eyes of anyone who dared to have an insolent attitude in front of him. Just as the tension reached its peak, the underling from earlier unexpectedly swung a piece of wood hard, smashing it right into his boss's head to prevent a worse disaster. Before Lee Sang's eyes, the two lackeys hastily dragged their dizzy boss away, accompanied by frantic apologies in hopes of keeping their lives. Lee Sang unexpectedly demanded the girl apologize to him for wasting his time and acting impolite. The girl looked up in stunned silence with her blazing red eyes, unable to believe the bizarre attitude of the one who had just bailed her out. Turning his back to walk away, he boldly declared that he would defeat anyone if he received worthy compensation. He even looked back calculatingly, promising a slight discount if the girl's circumstances were truly difficult, leaving the victim kneeling blankly in the middle of the deserted hallway, her hand tightly gripping the item she just received. It was the Delivery Paradise business card with the name Lee Sang clearly printed on it. The girl thoughtfully watched his retreating back, mysteriously brewing calculations in her heart. School dismissal time had arrived. The crowd of students rushed out the gate, but the schoolboy shipper had vanished early on. Time slowly ticked by until late afternoon. He restlessly checked his phone searching for a new signal. Sitting and eating a quick meal by the roadside, Lee Sang complained about a slow day and reminisced about the lucrative orders from yesterday. Lee Sang sat slumped next to his Cub motorcycle in the sunset, silently sighing about how making money in this world was truly too difficult. His eyes followed the luxurious skyscrapers reflecting on the river, a symbol of the wealth he always craved. He bitterly realized that among the countless sparkling apartments out there, he couldn't even afford to own a single square meter. Right at that moment, the notification bell from the Delivery Heaven app suddenly rang, shattering the quiet atmosphere. The phone screen displayed a new order with a reward of up to 10 million won, making him unable to hide his surprise. He hurriedly checked the map to pinpoint the destination, his heart starting to beat faster when he noticed the location of this mission. Lee Sang's eyes widened in sheer amazement when he saw the designated landmark clearly showing on his phone screen. Towering before the brilliant Gangnam Tower Palace, he was completely overwhelmed by its majesty and magnificence. He looked up at the top of the skyscraper and marveled that the naked eye couldn't even reach the peak of this colossal architectural structure. While packing his gear into his bag, he told himself this was a great opportunity to discover what lay hidden inside Seoul's most luxurious tower. Lee Sang began zipping up his signature orange jumpsuit, a familiar preparation routine for dangerous missions. He decisively put the helmet on his head, completely hiding the face of a high school boy behind the dark visor. His hands swiftly slipped into a pair of tactical gloves, tightening his focus for an uncompromising confrontation. Standing tall in front of the lavish building, he told himself he was feeling extremely excited and fully motivated for this order. His sharp, cold eyes flashed behind the protective helmet, silently affirming that it was time to get down to the business of making money. He strode down the vast and magnificent hallway inside the tower, where golden lights enveloped the space with an air of nobility. Stopping in front of the door to apartment 8001, Lee Sang knew he was standing at the threshold of his target. He glanced at his phone and wondered what kind of grudge the rich folks living in this penthouse had provoked to be targeted. The heavy door slowly cracked open, revealing a dark, mysterious void waiting for an intruder. The schoolboy shipper calmly stepped inside, loudly announcing that the package its owner had been waiting for had officially arrived. Lee Sang called out to ask if anyone was home and wondered why all the lights in the apartment were completely turned off. He turned on his phone's flashlight, trying to pierce through the darkness engulfing the vast penthouse space. The dim beam of light hit precious potted plants that were now all sealed with bright red confiscation notices. He slowly observed the luxurious but empty living room, where every object bore the marks of an asset seizure. Feeling annoyed, he took off his helmet and muttered complaints about the darkness and messiness of the place. He let out a soft sigh full of regret upon witnessing the ruin of a place that was once a symbol of wealth. Suddenly, shiny dress shoes slowly stepped out from the shadows, signaling a less than pleasant reception. Two strangers wearing tightly fitted masks hid behind the door, their hands gripping weapons ready to strike. The crazed assassin swung an iron bar hard, his face distorted with excitement as he prepared to finish off the target from behind. A brutal blow came crashing down, causing fresh blood to spurt into the air, officially sparking a bloody battle. Li Sang stood in the middle of a room filled with defeated enemies, his expression terrifyingly calm as he observed his surroundings. He frowned slightly in annoyance, silently asking himself what the hell was the mess unfolding before his eyes. While scrolling on his phone, he deduced that these aggressive guys in black suits were absolutely not the real owners of the apartment. He started complaining about the client not warning him about the number of opponents, and worried whether he would get stiffed on his service fee. From the opposite side, the masked assassins grew cautious upon realizing this teenager in the orange shirt was not as simple as he appeared. The leader glared, ordering his gang to stay highly focused, not to expose any openings, and to take him down in a single strike. Despite a surprise attack tearing through the air, Li Sang casually dodged the blow while keeping his eyes glued to his phone screen. He began to mutter, counting the number of enemies charging at him, a calmness so profound it made the opponents feel heavily insulted. Witnessing his dismissiveness, the assassin's eyes widened in shock mixed with fear at that inhuman reflex. Infuriated by being looked down upon, another henchman rushed in, swinging a razor-sharp axe accompanied by angry curses aimed straight at his head. Li Sang reacted incredibly fast, reaching out to grab the wrist of the guy intending to attack him from behind. The very moment the deadly axe blade came down, he calmly ducked low to dodge it, his eyes still glued to the phone screen. Using the momentum of his spin, he launched a lightning-fast counterattack that sent the assassin flying several meters through the air. His black-gloved hand decisively grabbed a large iron frame, preparing for the next highly calculated strike. A deafening crash rang out as he used the obstacle to smash all resistance, charging straight into the encirclement of the masked men. The henchman froze in astonishment, blood streaming down his forehead as he horrifyingly realized he was absolutely no match for him. With a cold expression, he casually counted the number of defeated foes, reaching 5 while still keeping track of the app. A powerful roundhouse kick was unleashed, kicking the next gangster away like a lifeless sandbag to the astonishment of the enemy. Suddenly from behind, a burly enforcer reached out his sinewy arms to tightly squeeze his body in a perilous submission hold. The guy confidently asserted that against absolute muscle power and weight class disparity, all of his flashy techniques were useless. The enforcer's eyes bulged in terror, unable to believe the truth unfolding right before his eyes. Li Sang clenched his fingers tight, using force to crush the opponent's wrist, making the henchman suffer to the point of going mad. Being tightly embraced from behind, he casually dropped a sarcastic remark about how excessive intimacy between men was truly disgusting. Suddenly he unleashed an overwhelming power, throwing the giant far away accompanied by a heart-rending scream of despair. A guy wearing a vest standing far away snapped, demanding to know why his cronies still hadn't rushed in to attack. Li Sang coldly turned his head back, smirking as he asked the cowardly henchman back whether he wanted him to personally welcome him. Facing those deathly eyes, the assassin trembled as he backed away and silently cursed the terrifying nature of the one wearing the bright jumpsuit. The dim lights clearly illuminated the door to apartment 8001, which witnessed the end of those who stood in the way. A horrific shockwave erupted as the iron door was violently slammed, crumbling before an unstoppable force. He calmly stood watching the final henchman collapse, silently confirming the total number of taken down enemies hit exactly 7 to complete the order. The apartment door slowly closed, leaving behind the last henchman lying unconscious on the cold floor. Li Sang let out a soft sigh full of disappointment, thinking to himself that this challenge still hadn't truly satisfied him. He muttered that it seemed there was still one left over, right as the silhouette of a petite girl quietly approached from behind. He was startled in shock when he saw the face of the one who just appeared, his eyes widening in complete bewilderment. It was the very schoolgirl with mysterious bright red eyes, the one he had just rescued from a bunch of bullies earlier that afternoon. He gasped and asked what on earth she was doing in a place full of assassins and dangers like this. His eyes narrowed with suspicion, silently waiting for a satisfactory answer from the person opposite him. The girl casually raised her phone displaying the delivery app, affirming that she was the one who had hired him to come here. Her eyes swept over the subordinates, lying all over the place, remarking that confronting these professional assassins was never a simple task. Witnessing Li Sang take them all down without even leaving a scratch, she satisfyingly declared that he was exactly the person she was looking for. Li Sang asked again in shock upon hearing the unbelievable proposal from the young girl he had just met. The schoolgirl looked at him with a resolute gaze, the wound on her face only adding to her melancholic and mysterious aura. Without a hint of hesitation, she firmly proposed that he agree to cooperate and work directly for her. Pointing at the assassins lying scattered around, she affirmed that she was in danger and wanted to officially rent his strength. Hearing her say that this job was no different from what he usually did, Li Sang snapped, asking what the hell she was rambling about. He got close to her face, angrily declaring that he would never be a full-time driver because that violated his professional principles. Recalling the fat guy's words from that afternoon, he sarcastically asked where someone bankrupt like her would get the money to hire an assassin. The girl calmly replied with a counter-question, reminding him to worry about how to receive the delivery fee for this order first. Noticing his silence as an admission, she slightly curled her lip to assert that she was indeed prepared. Li Sang sighed in utter weariness, accepted cash payment, and urged her to quickly pay up to conclude the transaction. Li Sang growled, announcing that with the incurred expenses, the figure had skyrocketed and he wouldn't accept any bargaining whatsoever. In response to that harsh attitude, the girl casually threw a thick stack of cash onto the floor as if it was just some negligible trash. The stacks of 50,000 won bills dropped at Li Sang's feet, forming an overwhelming mountain of wealth right in the middle of the luxurious apartment. His gaze began to change when the girl boldly locked in a compensation rate of up to 100 million won for every order he fulfilled. She casually held the empty briefcase, affirming that both sides were simply exchanging what the other needed most: power and money. Every crisp stack of money piled on top of each other enticingly, becoming an irresistible binding for the schoolboy shipper. Li Sang dropped to his knees to hug the pile of money to his chest, his face still in shock as he wondered if this was a dream. Sweating profusely, he stunningly recalculated and terrifyingly realized that 100 million won in cash was actually resting securely in his hands. The girl bent down to look at his expression, softly remarking that his eyes finally looked a bit more pleasant than they had a moment ago. Amidst a space reeking of money, the girl began to lower her voice to ask a final decisive question for this contract. The girl's glowing red eyes bored deep into the one opposite her, coldly dropping words forcing him to make the ultimate choice of whether to join or not. The quiet night enveloped the city blocks, where dim streetlights illuminated the deserted pathways. Li Sang stopped in front of the automated teller machine screen, preparing to take the final step of a danger-filled order. The familiar motorcycle was temporarily parked outside the deserted bank booth, a symbol of the shipper's roaming life. The black gloves tightly gripped the crumpled 50,000 won bill, a testament to a fierce battle that had just passed. He quietly stared at the sweat-drenched fruits of his labor, his face unable to hide his exhaustion yet full of determination. His hand decisively fed the stack of bills into the ATM deposit slot, a mechanical action but one containing a massive dream. The computer screen clearly displayed a message indicating the transaction was being processed, a dry mechanical sound echoing in the middle of the night. Standing alone in the glass booth flooded with blue light, his shadow stretched long on the floor looking completely solitary. Li Sang's gaze became cold and sharp, silently affirming that the price of blood would soon help him touch his ultimate goal. The sound of the Shinan Bank ATM operating steadily amidst the quiet space signaled that an important transaction had just been executed. The electronic screen displayed a successful transaction confirmation with a deposit amount of 50,000 won, bringing the total account balance to an impressive figure of over 52 million won. Li Sang stood frozen in the ATM booth, his eyes wide in shock as he stared at the dry words of gratitude appearing on the screen. Sweat poured down his pale face. He gritted his teeth in terror upon realizing that everything that had just happened was the truth and not a joke. Memories of 2 hours ago suddenly rushed back with the image of Seonha looking down from above. She coldly asked if he had enough guts to participate in this game. The young girl's glowing red eyes pierced deep into Li Sang's mind, forcing him to decisively make a final choice on whether to keep going or stop. He recalled the moment he had to bend down to pick up the stacks of 50,000 won bills scattered on the floor as a testament to ultimate temptation. In extreme tension, the orange-clad delivery boy silently blamed his own stupidity for having once doubted the true value of the fortune resting in his hands. Seonha gave a slight smirk, affirming that the agreement between the two sides had been officially established, marking the beginning of a highly dangerous relationship. Li Sang tightly clenched his black-gloved fist and walked away decisively, ready to plunge into the next challenges to carry out his mission. Lee Sang suddenly kicked away the stacks of large denomination bills, mockingly telling the girl she was foolish to think he would easily fall into her trap. The girl's expression didn't change at all, casually admitting that his recent act was actually very impressive, making her almost fall for it. His black gloves decisively crushed a bill right in front of her. Lee Sang began to expose the lie. He leaned close to the schoolgirl's face and coldly asserted that the entire pile of glittering wealth was actually just fake. His eyes were sharp and full of contempt, declaring that from the scent to the texture of these papers, nothing could fool him. Looking at the sealed apartment, he recalled the fat guy's words about her family going bankrupt, and asked who exactly she was trying to deceive. The schoolgirl silently looked at him with glowing red eyes, demanding to know if he really wanted to decline the order, and if he was sure he wouldn't regret it. Responding to that powerful invitation was a defiant and contemptuous middle finger from the high school delivery guy. He turned his back and walked away, declaring he would make this delivery free because she looked so pathetic, and warned her never to acknowledge him at school. But just as he stood in front of the ATM, Lee Sang clutched his head in shock upon realizing that the cash he had just kicked away was actually real money. Lee Sang banged his head against the glass of the ATM booth, wondering if he should swallow his pride and go back to pick up the pile of real money he had just kicked away. He collapsed onto the ATM in despair, thinking to himself that he was about to lose his mind and fearing that this life-changing opportunity would never return. His eyes suddenly lit up when he noticed a new signal of hope appearing on his phone screen. The chart of the cryptocurrency he had invested in a few days ago was suddenly skyrocketing with promising green candles. Sang stared in astonishment as the numbers danced continuously, unable to believe his net worth had changed in the blink of an eye. He burst into a crazed laugh, loudly declaring he would go all in on this game to soon move into Tower Palace. But grim reality struck when the chart suddenly plummeted without warning, causing his assets to evaporate nearly entirely. Outside the phone booth, passers-by walked on casually, completely unaware of the collapse of a wealthy dream. His extreme rage triggered a burst of strength that shattered the entire glass surrounding the ATM booth, creating a scene of complete devastation. Standing amidst the wreckage with receipts floating around, Lee Sang stared silently at his phone, bitterly realizing everything had just gone up in smoke. Lee Sang stood dazed amidst the passing crowd, the panic screams of the people around him seemingly unable to reach his ears. The hands that were used to only delivering goods were now locked tight in cold handcuffs as the police confirmed his identity as a minor. Sitting in the interrogation room, he faced a barrage of rapid questions regarding his motive for breaking in and his family's contact information. The officer declared he had 1 week to compensate for all the damages and advised him to feel lucky for the bank's leniency. His eyes widened in shock, a profound sense of emptiness enveloping him as he realized he had lost everything in a single night. The compensation bill with a figure of nearly 10 million won appeared like a death sentence to a poor high school student. Lee Sang stood alone in the middle of a deserted intersection, his long shadow stretching under the dim yellow streetlight in utter helplessness. He walked silently into the night, his mind completely blank as the future ahead suddenly turned bleak and dark. The school sky brightened up the next day, but it couldn't seem to dispel the suffocating atmosphere weighing heavily on his shoulders. With a haggard face and dark circles under his eyes, Lee Sang sought out the girl from yesterday to restart their unfinished conversation about the partnership proposal. Lee Sang swallowed his pride, earnestly begging the girl to give him a chance to take back his foolish decision from earlier. The only response was a cold silence and a sharp gaze from the mysterious schoolgirl's glowing red eyes. She casually walked through the crowd, leaving behind the fat male student who stood there bewildered, not understanding what was happening. The boss smirked, thinking this was the perfect time to settle old debts, and loudly declared his plan to hunt him down. He aggressively asserted that he had personally selected top-tier mercenaries to prepare for an unfair fight. Lee Sang quietly endured the humiliation, letting the opponent scream about ending everything right here. Suddenly he delivered a lightning-fast kick that sent the henchman flying, making the boss scream out his subordinate's name in horror. Minseep's body lay motionless on the cracked ground, a pathetic end for someone who dared to look down on his strength. Another henchman rushed forward and grabbed his shoulder tightly from behind, frantically asking if he had completely lost his mind. Lee Sang spun around and threw a steel punch that shattered his enemy's face, asserting that he was merely conducting a strength check before the real match began. Li Sang explained while knocking down the guy and read that being cautious with such a large amount of money was absolutely the right thing to do. He threw another steel punch and agreed to reduce his fee by half, while suggesting payment through an app for tax transparency. Delivering a kick that sent the next opponent flying, he shamelessly asked to borrow 10 million won of the deposit in advance because he had an urgent matter. He proactively extended his hand in front of the girl, his eyes full of expectation for an agreement from the female client. Standing amidst the henchmen lying scattered around, Li Sang decisively demanded that she give him the contract to sign immediately. The schoolgirl silently stared at his outstretched hand, her face showing absolutely no emotion. Suddenly the girl turned her back and walked away, to the utter astonishment of the delivery guy, who was previously brimming with confidence. He frantically ran after her to hold her back, shouting why she had changed her mind when she was the one who needed his strength. The girl slightly tilted her head coldly, beginning to remind him of his behavior all this time. Her glowing red eyes stared deep into his mind, coldly declaring that she was extremely annoyed because he always talked to her with an arrogant attitude. Li Sang stood frozen as the girl called him out on his attitude, demanding that he make his request politely. The bizarre argument in the hallway caused the curious female students to whisper, while the girl emphasized that the contractor-client relationship requires absolute respect. He scratched his head in sheer frustration, thinking that having to humble himself to beg was 10,000 times more agonizing than life-and-death battles. From the perspective of the defeated on the ground, the schoolgirl's figure appeared overwhelmingly authoritative, completely dominating the space. The girl casually searched through her school bag, starting to flip open information about the prestigious Dodong High School. Her glowing red eyes flashed with a cold gaze when mentioning the name Hyo Min-sip, the official target of the contract. Li Sang was stunned when he heard her declare that that guy deserved a punishment more brutal than anyone else. The scenery suddenly shifted to a vast, lush green golf course stretching under a clear sky. A golf ball soared powerfully through the air, carrying the ambition and power of the one who had just swung the club. The triumphant chairman lowered his club amidst the flattering applause of his henchmen for a shot praised as superb. Hyo Yonggang lowered his head deep in thought, his sinister nature hidden beneath a baseball cap that obscured half his face. He turned to ask his henchmen if he looked decent, causing them to tremble and confirm that he looked absolutely terrifying. Taking a long drag from his cigarette, he bitterly remarked that this world was full of freeloaders who didn't deserve the money they received. Standing in the middle of the luxurious golf course, the chairman of Yonggang's steel group coldly blew out smoke before the servility of his subordinates. Right at that moment, the phone ringtone inside his pants pocket suddenly went off, breaking the arrogant atmosphere around them. He glanced at the screen, his face instantly softening upon seeing the call coming from his beloved son. Speaking in a cheerful voice, he praised his son as the most reliable child in the world and generously asked if he needed more pocket money. Contrary to that joy, the other end of the line was only the sound of teeth grinding in resentment along with a gloomy cry for his father. The son Min-sip was sitting pathetically, screaming over the phone that he wanted to kill a girl named Song Seonha at all costs. Hearing that name, Hyo Yonggang's eyes suddenly changed dangerously upon realizing that she was the daughter of the man he had painstakingly searched for all this time. Min-sip shrieked over the phone, bitterly recounting how she had hired someone to brutally beat him and humiliate him by shaving his head bald. The photo of him lying unconscious in a pathetic state was spread all over social media, becoming a laughingstock for the public. He wailed in despair, fearing he would have no face left to show up at school after this horrifying incident. Silently listening to his son's crying, Hyo Yonggang took a long drag from his cigarette with a dark, calculating face. He reassured his son that he would handle everything and told him not to worry about it anymore. A sharp click sounded as he decisively cut the call, officially ending a father's last bit of patience. His eyes grew cold as he mentioned the daughter of Song Jaenkyo, the one who had just dared to touch the bloodline of the Hyo family. Standing in the middle of a bizarre golf course with human heads buried to serve as tees, he growled and asked his henchmen how they planned to take responsibility. Looking at the henchmen trembling beneath his feet, he mocked how they couldn't even handle a single girl yet dared to demand a handsome fee. He swung his club to build momentum, preparing for a brutal strike onto the prey's head, coldly asserting that street trash could never be trusted. A brutal strike sent the ball flying off the living tee, leaving the henchman in excruciating pain from being turned into a tool for amusement. Hyo Yonggang turned around with sharp eyes, his dark expression clearly revealing the ruthlessness behind the sickening punishment. Standing before him was Bae Minjun, the delivery guy in a strange blue outfit, respectfully greeting him and admitting that this sport was harder than imagined. The delivery guy smiled smugly and declared that he should just focus on fighting because it was easier and brought more joy. Chairman Hio gave a slight signal to his henchman, asserting that that was precisely why he called him here for a special mission. He demanded absolute obedience, loudly declaring that all his hopes were placed entirely into this delivery guy's hands. A dull thud sounded as the black briefcase was opened, revealing the kind of power that could alter any decision in the blink of an eye. Stacks of 50,000 won bills were piled up invitingly, accompanied by the promise of a handsome bonus if the job was completed cleanly. Bae Minjun froze for a moment, his eyes glued to the massive fortune gleaming under the sun. He burst into a crazed laugh out of sheer excitement, officially nodding to accept this deal full of blood and tears. Bae Minjun smiled sarcastically while giving a military salute, mocking the gangster's outdated way of placing orders. He held up his phone showing the Delivery Heaven app and retorted to the chairman, asking if he had to teach the old man even these basics. When a henchman put a hand on his shoulder, Minjun smirked in contempt, thinking to himself that this company was ultimately full of idiots. Faced with the threat demanding he keep his mouth shut, the delivery guy maintained a reckless, defiant expression. His eyes swept over the heads buried in the dirt, a brutal punishment right on the magnificent golf course. Minjun growled, warning the subordinate not to touch him with those filthy hands unless he wanted a miserable end. Watching the henchman panic and run to find the manager, he smirked, asserting that it was the superior's incompetence that had ruined the job. Over the phone, Hyo Yong-gang admitted his poor handling of the situation and declared he would entrust this entire matter into Minjun's hands. The old man urged him to finish everything as quickly as possible, making the delivery guy's eyes light up with excitement. The screen clearly displayed Song Seon-ha's profile along with a warning that she had hired a full-time delivery guy to protect herself. A cold, murderous look was evident behind the safety goggles of the blue-shirt delivery guy who had just received his new mission. He looked straight at Chairman Hyo and arrogantly declared that he would personally handle this target in his own way, hoping the other party had no objections. The boss calmly lit a cigarette, coldly instructing that as long as he cleaned up all traces without leaving any loopholes, it would be fine. A decisive tap on the accept order button on the app officially triggered a highly dramatic massacre. Bae Minjun broke into a crazed, excited smile, silently cheering that this lucrative deal had been officially sealed. The figure of 50 million won in remuneration for each mission shone brightly on the screen, proving the exorbitant price of those who operate in the shadows. Meanwhile, Lee Sang was intently checking the terms on his phone, confirming that from now on all expenses would be paid fairly through the app until the job was completed. He raised his hand in a serious gesture, emphasizing the mandatory rule that he was absolutely not allowed to accept any other orders during the contract period. Seon-ha's glowing red eyes bored into him as she firmly ordered that no matter what happened, he must always be closely by her side to protect her. Standing opposite the young man, the girl pointed right at Lee Sang's face, demanding he make an oath of honor to ensure absolute commitment between them. Lee Sang stood in stunned silence for a long while at the somewhat bizarre and highly possessive demand of the young girl. He scratched his head in exasperation, silently mocking that the other party really knew how to utter cheesy words that made the listener cringe. Even so, faced with the power of money, he clicked his tongue, raised his hand, and pledged to do exactly as she wished. The only response to that concession was a sharp gaze and an unflinching, cold expression on Seon-ha's scarred face. Just then, a sudden phone ring interrupted their highly awkward conversation. The young girl held up her phone showing the order notification and officially declared that from now on he was a full-time delivery guy under her ownership. Lee Sang sweat bullets as he tapped on his phone to calculate, thinking that even though the compensation was settled, this month's rent and food were still a tough problem. He hurriedly chased after her to ask when the next order would be, asserting that he would willingly accept even a snack run without hesitation. Watching the girl's back walking further away, he blankly pointed in the opposite direction and reminded her that the school gate was actually over there. Seon-ha stopped and turned her head with soulless eyes, coldly stating that she had no intention of going to school and was starting to do her own job. Lee Sang panicked and screamed upon hearing Seon-ha say she was going to work, fearing that his long-maintained perfect attendance award would vanish into thin air. Ignoring his weak protests, the girl calmly asked where he parked, leaving him crying over his academic record that was on the verge of ruin as they walked. Nevertheless, he still had to speed off with her on his motorcycle, leaving behind the school and unfinished classes to begin the mission. Meanwhile, at Tangio High School, a gloomy and tense atmosphere was enveloping the otherwise peaceful campus. Inside, a group of schoolgirls were lined up, trembling in fear under the strict surveillance of mysterious masked men. Sitting arrogantly above them was a blond guy with a haughty face, the one who seemed to be the ringleader behind this outrageous intimidation. He looked bored and called out coldly to force everyone's attention onto himself. Turning to ask his chubby underling who was busy eating, he wondered why the girls were trembling so much when he felt he had behaved extremely kindly. He continued hurling insults, stating that they all came here voluntarily, so there was no need to be as scared as pigs being led to the slaughterhouse. With a terrifyingly calm tone, the blond guy ordered everyone to calm down so he could repeat his final demand one more time. The blond guy bossily ordered the schoolgirls to strip immediately in front of the waiting camera lenses. He pointed a finger, threatening that if they continued to be stubbornly disobedient, he would not hesitate to use violence to resolve things. In the midst of this extreme tension, Li Sang suddenly appeared from behind and loudly announced that the mysterious order had officially been delivered. He calmly looked at his phone to confirm the target's identity, as Song Jiangsu, a senior at Tangio High School. The leader turned around in bewilderment, asking if it was his chubby subordinate eating nearby who had placed this weird order. Just as the blond guy realized something was wrong when his name was called out, a terrifying murderous intent lunged right at his face. Li Sang unleashed a lightning-fast kick with terrifying power, sending both the boss and the camera setup flying meters away to everyone's astonishment. He stood firmly and coldly declared that this was the very gift his client had specifically sent just for a sinner like him. Witnessing that overwhelming strength, the henchmen could only tremble and raise their hands in surrender, while the chubby accomplice quickly fled the scene. Amidst the wreckage and chaos, Seonha's authoritative footsteps echoed as she officially walked in to witness firsthand the miserable end of her enemy. Seonha slowly walked into the scene with a cold face, asking if he had executed exactly what he was assigned. Li Sang gave a smug smile and a thumbs up, confirming that a fast and accurate order had officially been completed successfully. She quietly approached the collapsed boss and decisively picked up the dropped phone from the floor to take the next step. Seonha ruthlessly grabbed his hair and held the screen up for facial recognition, but the bloody mess of injuries rendered everything useless. The phone screen displayed a dry error message, instantly halting all efforts to access the secret data. The young girl sighed lightly in disappointment at the unnecessary carelessness of the partner she had just hired. She turned and scolded Li Sang for being an amateur by ruining the guy's face, making the recognition feature fail to work as originally intended. Behind her back, the two henchmen were sweating profusely and trembling, wondering whether they should risk their lives with a sneak attack or flee to stay alive. Right at that moment, Seonha's authoritative voice suddenly rang out, making the two cowards instantly flinch in terror. With a sharp gaze, she began to interrogate them, demanding they reveal the school identities of every girl being held captive there. Seonha coldly pointed at the two trembling henchmen, preparing to issue the next punishments for their cowardice. She sternly ordered them to go kneel in the corner and raise both hands high to atone for the despicable acts they had committed. With a powerfully threatening tone, Seonha declared that if anyone dared to lower their hands without permission, they'd better prepare to meet the Grim Reaper. Li Sang stood blankly watching, silently remarking that this client truly had incredibly bizarre hobbies and behaviors. The young girl coldly demanded he move quickly because they still had many targets left to wipe clean off today's blacklist. The next destination was Gujang High School, the hideout of the next scums that Seonha wanted to punish. Inside the classroom, Boss Jong Sungwon was casually enjoying his subordinate's obedience when he grew extremely annoyed seeing a strange delivery guy barge in suddenly. But right before he could open his mouth to hurl an insult, Li Sang threw an extremely powerful steel punch, smashing the face of the self-proclaimed notorious senior. He calmly grabbed the moaning, defeated guy's hair and held up his phone for a selfie to confirm the order was successfully completed. Witnessing that terrifyingly dominant scene, the rest could only scream in despair and run for their lives down the hallway. Desperate cries for help echoed from the teacher's office, completely shattering the peaceful atmosphere of the school. A henchman frantically pushed the door open, begging the teachers to save him because a madman was slaughtering his underlings. But immediately, a gloved hand decisively clamped over his mouth, extinguishing his last hope of calling for help. Li Sang gave a fake smile, reassuring the teachers that they were just playing around and apologizing for the trouble. He started taking photos to confirm the order with the shepherd Mgangju, who was crying miserably after a humiliating defeat. The next target, Mad Dog Kim Chongji, was also quickly taken down and laid flattened against the cracked wall. One by one, tough guys like Yoon Dojin and Go Dongpal had to taste pain and became testaments to his overwhelming power. Lee Sang excitedly gave a thumbs up while taking a selfie with the ringleader Ju Jang-hun to mark the end of a bloody mission. The order completed text flashed brightly on the phone, cementing his absolute reliability and delivery speed. The workday ended with a box full of trophy phones, proving the complete defeat of the entire gang. A firm hand closed the box lid, signaling preparation for the final stretch full of dangers waiting ahead. Seon-ha coldly reminded him that there was only one location left to conclude today's order, and demanded he stay on high alert, as this was the toughest challenge. Lee Sang's sharp gaze showed clearly behind his helmet. It seemed he was growing suspicious about the ambiguity of this relationship. He didn't hesitate to ask the girl outright whether they were truly on the same team and looking in the same direction. Seon-ha looked at him with soulless eyes and asked back suspiciously what exactly he was trying to imply with that question. Lee Sang scratched his helmet while expressing that he would follow all demands, but felt this collaboration lacked the necessary information exchange of true partners. He figured they should at least share what the true goal was, while another cold hand lightly touched his yellow helmet, signaling him to stay quiet. In response to that expectation came a harsh affirmation from the young girl, stating that there was absolutely no concept of teammates or partners between them. Seon-ha's glowing red eyes pierced into him, emphasizing that this was just a fair transactional relationship bound by money that could be terminated at any moment. The girl looked down at Lee Sang and coldly concluded that she was under no obligation to reveal anything to someone who, in her eyes, was only worth that much. Seon-ha held up her phone and began explaining that the reason she always collected them was to find the contact info of the person she was looking for hidden inside. Lee Sang's eyes grew pensive upon hearing the girl declare that the ultimate goal of this entire plan was to hand him over to that mysterious figure. Standing next to the motorcycle under the sunset, she coldly asked if that explanation was enough to dispel all his doubts. Suddenly, a horrific collision with a massive impact sent everything flying, knocking Lee Sang backward completely out of control. Amidst the thick dust and smoke of the explosion site, he rushed over and tightly embraced Seon-ha to shield her from the collapsing debris around them. He worriedly looked at the girl huddled in his arms and urgently asked if she was injured or had any serious issues after that crash. Right at that moment, a stranger's gloved hand suddenly launched a lightning-fast attack, aiming straight at the delivery boy's arm to break his defense. Seon-ha jolted upright in utter shock, realizing a new enemy had revealed himself so unexpectedly and maliciously right before her eyes. The young girl's red eyes glinted with anger mixed with extreme tension in the face of a dangerous incident totally outside her calculations. Lee Sang lay collapsed on the ground with a face full of pain, clutching his helmet and cursing resentfully upon realizing he was in a terribly bad situation. Lee Sang looked at the smashed, smoking motorcycle and silently wept, as there were still 28 months of installments left to pay off. The chubby guy Minseep sitting in the car screamed furiously upon realizing these were the very same people who had dared to snatch his phone earlier. He turned and yelled at the driver for his incompetence in failing to block them, despite always boasting that he was a deliverman who could handle any request. In response to that rage was the cunning smile of the old man in the blue cap. He casually admitted that since he hadn't taken an order in this area for a long time, his skills were a bit rusty. The old man slowly stepped out of the vehicle and asked his young master to sit tight and wait for a moment, while he cleaned up the scene himself. A veiny hand decisively yanked the latch of the truck bed door, signaling that a highly dangerous action was about to commence. Standing tall before the pile of goods, the old man declared he would make the delivery immediately, and dump everything on the opponents without any mercy. Meanwhile, Seon-ha's phone screen was completely shattered with splotchy streaks of color, reducing all crucial data to zero. The young girl stared intently at the wreckage in her hand with a resentful glare, realizing that all the collected phone numbers had been cleanly wiped out. Seon-ha's glowing red eyes flashed a deadly look, signaling a horrifying rage about to rain down as all limits of endurance were officially broken. The truck bearing the words "Go to Express" appeared ominously next to the crushed remains of Lee Sang's motorcycle. Seon-ha hurriedly warned Lee Sang to be extremely careful because Go to was not a normal shipping company, but housed assassins disguised as deliverymen. Ignoring the advice, Lee Sang marched imposing towards the back of the truck and called out to the old deliveryman defiantly. With fiery eyes behind his goggles, he growled, demanding the other party immediately compensate for his bike if he didn't want to face death. The old deliveryman still casually squatted and rummaged through the mountain of goods, completely ignoring the young man's aggressive attitude. He examined each package, muttering in disappointment as he still hadn't found anything truly to his liking to use as a weapon for the upcoming battle. Suddenly he stopped and gave a knowing smile, accompanied by a brief confirmation that he had finally found an item that suited his taste. The old man stood tall on the truck bed, carrying a strangely long package on his shoulder, and declared he would use it to handle him today. Lee Sang was trembling with anger. He started ranting about his one-of-a-kind custom bike that he had saved up for so long to buy, only to have used it for 2 months. A cry of resentment echoed from behind his helmet as he declared he would make the old man pay for even the mental trauma he was suffering. The old deliverman suddenly swung the great sword he had just pulled from the package, creating a slash that tore through the air with terrifying power. Standing proudly on the truck bed, he clicked his tongue regretfully, admitting that it had been so long since he used this weapon that his force calibration was slightly off. With a mocking smile, the old man asserted that Lee Sang only kept his life thanks to sheer luck, as the blade had missed him by an inch. He smugly warned the young man that if he kept taking meaningless, reckless actions, he would soon lose his life in this dangerous delivery profession. Looking down at the deep crater in the road he had just created, the old deliverman mocked that he should have chosen to dodge instead of trying to block the attack. A sharp slash mark appeared clearly on the orange jumpsuit, and blood began to soak the fabric, leaving Lee Sang standing silently in pain. Resting the great sword on his shoulder casually, the old man chuckled, saying he completely understood the impulsiveness and desire to show off in people his age. The old man's eyes grew dark as he recounted the countless arrogant youngsters who ended up buried in the cold earth just because they didn't know how to temper their aggressive inner fire. Contrary to fear, Lee Sang decisively clenched his fists and loudly challenged the other man to swing his blade and attack once more. He admitted his mistake in underestimating the range of the long weapon, but the resolute gaze behind his safety goggles confirmed that this time he would definitely stop it. The old deliverman's eyes suddenly narrowed, emitting a dark aura of killing intent aimed straight at the target before him. He swung an attack while coldly stating that the youngster's show of strength would only quickly lead to death. The great sword swung in a deadly arc, chopping straight down at Lee Sang with a force that made the air feel suffocating. Lee Sang clenched his fist so tightly that his tactical gloves smoked profusely after the extraordinary effort to block the 1,000-pound blow. Despite the ground beneath his feet shaking so hard it cracked into a deep crater, the delivery boy stood firm in a defiant stance. Fresh blood from the sharp gash on his side splattered into the air, proving the ferocity of an uncompromising confrontation. A sharp, unwavering gaze showed behind his helmet. He quietly observed his opponent as if searching for the ultimate chance to counterattack. He raised his smoking fist and declared that he had now officially gotten the feel of combat in this fight. With an arrogant attitude, Lee Sang challenged the old man to throw out all his other tricks because he would definitely break everything the old man threw at him. The old deliverman was completely stunned, his eyes wide with horror upon seeing that the treasured weapon in his hand had been completely shattered. The old deliverman gave a faint chuckle, his hand still tightly gripping the remaining hilt of the weapon just destroyed in the heated clash. He nonchalantly kicked the shattered fragments aside as if they were just a pile of useless garbage. He started reassembling another part of the bizarre weapon, silently marveling that he himself didn't understand how he survived his crazy past. A nostalgic smile appeared on his weathered face. He looked at Lee Sang and admitted that the image of the young man fighting for his life reminded him of his past self. Suddenly, he turned his head and called the name of the client kid cowering in the back, his tone hinting at a new plan. The chubby guy Minseep panicked and pulled his hair upon hearing the old man declare that he, too, would have to directly get his hands dirty in this dangerous battle. The old man glared at the coward with intense pressure, demanding he show more guts and quickly stepped closer to lend a hand in finishing the target off. Minseep screamed furiously in protest, insisting that he was the client and demanding a refund for this utterly absurd service. In a fit of desperation and fear, the pampered boy suddenly delivered a powerful stomp that shook the ground to prove he wasn't someone to be easily bullied. The old deliverman calmly asked if he had ever experienced a part-time job, causing the chubby guy to blankly confess that he had been raised too sheltered and had never known hardship. The old deliveryman Goda gave a sarcastic smile, remarking that the excessive pampering of parents was exactly why kids today had become useless. The old man continued questioning Minseep about heavy cargo loading work, making the spoiled boy sweat bullets and nod tremblingly in admission. From afar, Seonha suddenly screamed Lee Sang's name in anger to wake up his focus amidst the tense confrontation. Standing amidst the stifling atmosphere, the young girl quietly observed the delivery boy's back with glowing red eyes full of skepticism. Seonha sternly reminded Lee Sang that he was executing an order and was absolutely not allowed to let his personal pride affect the job. She continued to yell that the current power gap was too huge and demanded he immediately fall back to find an alternative. Lee Sang tilted his head arrogantly, coldly asserting that combat was his own domain where he held absolute control. Seonha's crimson eyes flared with killing intent upon hearing that declaration. She growled a warning for him to never harbor thoughts of lecturing her. The delivery boy silently criticized the old man's rude attitude toward women just as a sharp boulder suddenly hurtled straight down at his head from above. Without hesitation, he threw a mighty steel punch, shattering the boulder into thousands of pieces to prove his true mettle. A giant spiked ball suddenly tore through the air, rushing straight toward Lee Sang with suffocating power. That was the old deliverman's treacherous ranged attack as he began swinging the iron chain to control this deadly weapon. The old man could not hide his surprise upon witnessing the young opponent's incredibly stubborn resistance. A 1,000-pound punch from the boy in orange crushed the spiked ball, making the old man admire his attitude of doing whatever it took to keep his promise. Lee Sang coiled up to gather momentum amidst the thick dust, making the old man wonder in awe what this kid's hands were actually made of. Shards from the helmet gradually fell away to reveal his sharp eyes, proving the ferocity of a showdown that had reached its peak. Old man Goda roared, ordering the chubby guy in the back to throw weapons extremely fast so as not to create any openings for a counterattack. Minseep panted from exhaustion. He began cursing the old man as a piece of trash and resented having to do this heavy lifting work. The old deliveryman turned to look at him with murderous eyes, coldly reminding him that just one more instance of laziness mid-battle, and the spoiled boy would be instantly kicked out and lose his job, causing Minseep's face to distort in terror and completely collapse. The old deliveryman Goda clicked his tongue, mocking the weakness of today's youth upon seeing chubby Minseep's terrified face amidst the rain of crates. A long blade handle suddenly pierced through the package with extreme force to initiate a vicious attack. The old man swung the great sword he had just pulled from the pile of boxes, creating a sky-ripping slash aimed straight at Lee Sang. Unfazed, the orange-clad delivery boy threw a steel punch that smashed the obstacle to pieces, sending wooden splinters flying everywhere in the air. Witnessing that destructive power, the old deliveryman was stunned, his eyes wide with terror, unable to believe what he was seeing. The razor-sharp blade suddenly jutted out from the package, aiming precisely at the target to finish off the opponent in the blink of an eye. The old deliveryman gritted his teeth and swung a lethal strike, pouring all his energy into this decisive move. Lee Sang, quick as lightning, delivered a frontal strike that snapped the opponent's blade handle into pieces right before it could touch him. His sharp eyes showed clearly behind the goggles as a blast of hot air brushed his face, cementing the prowess of a true professional. The old deliveryman was completely frozen in helplessness, only able to stare as his favorite weapon was reduced to splintered firewood. A sharp spearhead suddenly pierced through the crate, signaling a sudden and treacherous attack from the old deliveryman. Unflinching, Lee Sang unleashed a steel punch that demolished the incoming spiked ball, sending sharp fragments exploding into the air. The black-gloved fist drove powerfully through the cardboard, turning the opponent's disguised weapon into a harmless mess. The old man Goda spun skillfully, using the handle to toss surrounding crates to blind his opponent and prepare for his next strike. Despite countless deadly spikes closing in from all sides, the orange-shirted delivery guy maintained extreme focus to find an opening for a counterattack. He put all his might into his right arm, once again obliterating the crate the old man was using as a frontal assault weapon. The old man's eyes briefly showed shock at the youngster's strength. He hurriedly delivered a decisive kick to keep a safe distance. The ground under Lee Sang's feet crumbled after a breathtaking collision. He braced himself like an immovable mountain amid the dust. The old deliveryman gritted his teeth in determination, swinging a blade attached to a heavy crate and reminding his opponent to be careful with this special package. The peak of madness came when he hurled a massive cylinder weighing 500 kilograms, roaring that this was the finishing blow for the arrogant fool. Lee Sang unleashed a steel punch that utterly crushed the incoming sharp boulder, turning the opponent's attack to rubble in the blink of an eye. The horrifying pressure of the impact snapped the old man's weapon handle in half, completely neutralizing all his final efforts to resist. He bolted through the falling debris, putting immense psychological pressure on the opponent standing ahead. The old deliveryman Goda began sweating bullets and trembling, realizing he was facing a teenager with monstrous strength. Meanwhile, Minseep lay flat on the truck bed, panting and insisting that he had given his all to throw away every obstructing piece of cargo. Lee Sang decisively reached up to unbuckle his helmet, preparing to enter the most critical phase of the battle. He revealed his murderously intense face and coldly declared that it was now time for both sides to settle the score fairly regarding the motorcycle's damages. The old man's eyes suddenly grew dark and sharp. He growled a curse that those who boasted were usually the first to die. The image of the Goda Company cap appeared hauntingly, hinting at a bloody past for this notorious old deliveryman. Flashing back 30 years, a highly arrogant young Kim Taeksa demanded everyone step back because he alone was more than enough to clean up everything. The seniors in blue uniforms couldn't help but worry, urgently calling Kim's name and reminding him to stick to the plan instead of constantly showing off all by himself. Their eyes turned toward the solitary shadow standing tall in the distance, the one rumored to be a professional deliveryman personally hired by a massive conglomerate. Upon hearing the title of a massive conglomerate, Kim's face suddenly changed color, filled with astonishment mixed with skepticism about his opponent's true identity. He casually walked away with a look of sheer contempt, silently mocking the opponent as nothing more than an amateur hiding behind powerful men, having never tasted the cruel reality of the battlefield. With an arrogant smile on his young face, Kim boldly declared that showing off is only for the incompetent, and that rule absolutely did not apply to him. A horrific scene unfolded amidst an eerily glowing pink space, where Kim stood proudly among a pile of bloody corpses, coldly holding up the head of a defeated foe. Smirking mysteriously, he repeated the bitter remark about the meaningless display of power by those without true strength. Looking at the man kneeling at his feet in utter panic, Kim coldly expressed his absolute agreement with the view regarding the death of the arrogant. He brought up his grudge-filled past, admitting that he was sick and tired of hearing the senior's warnings that he would soon lose his life due to his impulsive temper. His smile grew even more manic as he revealed the terrifying truth that all those seniors were now dead, and he himself had finished off quite a few of them. Kim Taeksa's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. He admitted that the only reason he temporarily spared the opponent's life was because it had been a very long time since he met someone he could converse with. Standing tall amidst the glowing space, he arrogantly suggested that both of them should continue to show off their strength to prove that the path they chose was absolutely right. However, ever since that fateful incident, he had decided to completely discard his arrogance and bid farewell to his bloody, bare-handed fighting style. He chose to step back from the battlefield, retreating into the disguise of an ordinary deliveryman to live a reclusive life with minimal attention. A primal fear suddenly arose as he stood amidst the ruins, terrified that destiny would force him to clash with that terrifying person once again. For 30 long years, he had tried every way to turn a blind eye to the past, struggling to forget the horrifying memories that still haunted him. Yet now, he had accidentally run into a hot-blooded teenager with the exact same mettle as his own past self. The Goda Company cap dropping onto the street signaled a decisive choice, urging him to quickly flee from this cruel reality. The old deliveryman's footsteps hastened as he realized that continuing to face the young man before him had completely exceeded his own limits of endurance. Lee Sang quietly watched him go with a solemn expression, while Kim Taeksa bitterly admitted to himself that trying to fight any further was just a ridiculous display. Kim Taeksa decisively threw away his cap, lowered his center of gravity, and raised his hands into a stance, ready for a fair hand-to-hand showdown. At that sudden change, Lee Sang let out a soft gasp of surprise and quietly observed his opponent with an incredibly calm demeanor. Deep within the old deliveryman, a fierce wave of doubt suddenly surged, making him wonder if his life of hiding all this time was truly okay. He clenched his fists so tightly that his veins bulged, telling himself that he could no longer continue living such a cowardly, aging life. With a determination to never step back again, Kim Taeksa gathered momentum and lunged forward at an astonishing speed for someone his age. He threw a powerful punch accompanied by a sky-shaking roar, boldly asserting that in his youth, He too possessed iron fists no less formidable than the boy's. Breaking into an excited smile, the young man loudly declared that this was the only interesting thing the old man had shown all day. Li Sang began his counterattack with unbelievable speed, aiming straight at the opponent's opening while the old man was still fully committed to his unfinished strike. An extremely powerful steel punch smashed right into the old deliverman's face, sending teeth flying and officially ending all resistance in a split second. The old man flew through the air like a broken doll before crashing down, leaving Li Sang standing firmly below with an incredibly nonchalant expression. Li Sang quietly turned his back and walked away after defeating his opponent, coldly declaring that the old man didn't need to compensate for his motorcycle anymore. He glanced back with an arrogant look, asserting that he was about to get his hands on hundreds of billions of won, so he would generously let this debt go as an act of charity. However, the chubby guy Minseep couldn't swallow the humiliation. He screamed frantically and hurled harsh insults at the two who had just defeated him. Suddenly, Li Sang sensed an unusual shift. His eyes narrowed in high alert as he realized the coward was executing a reckless scheme. In the blink of an eye, Minseep rushed over and took Seonha hostage, growling a threat to act ruthlessly if anyone dared to move even a single finger. The razor-sharp blade pressed tightly against the young girl's neck, creating a life-or-death situation as the female client's life was directly threatened. He frantically screamed, demanding his phone back, threatening to stab the girl's neck instantly if he didn't get an answer. But with the reflexes of a master, Li Sang dashed over in time and used his iron grip to crush the chubby guy's knife-wielding wrist, preventing a tragedy. He decisively threw a direct steel punch that made Minseep cry out in pain, completely losing his ability to hold the hostage. A powerful follow-up kick immediately after sent the spoiled brat flying away, officially putting an end to his ridiculous hostage-taking charade. Seonha stood tall and authoritative, coldly looking down at Minseep as he groaned in pain at her feet. Li Sang casually asked the chubby guy back if he really thought he would be foolish enough to act without having a self-defense plan ready. The young girl glanced back and firmly asserted that in a fair one-on-one fight, she would have taken him down a long time ago. Amidst the deserted and dusty street, a massive tow truck rolled onto the scene to clean up the wreckage. Li Sang decisively stomped his foot hard onto Minseep's face, pressing the coward tightly against the pavement as a warning. He breathed a soft sigh of relief that the worst didn't happen, then curiously asked Seonha if she had ever practiced martial arts, seeing her move so proficiently. Ignoring the compliments, the young girl quietly turned her back and walked away in a mysterious, cold silence. Seonha's shoes stepped over the shattered phones scattered across the street, a testament to the opponent's miserable defeat. Li Sang's eyes became sharp and highly focused, as if he were calculating his next moves. He clicked his tongue, concluding that the delivery profession was always fraught with accidents, and in this chaotic situation, no one could be blamed. Li Sang boldly affirmed that his job was to fight, not to be a bodyguard, while demanding that both sides settle the payment fairly according to their agreement. Suddenly, Seonha approached and gently lifted his black-gloved hand to inspect the signs of damage after the fierce battle. With a slight look of concern on her face, the young girl softly asked if there was anything wrong with his hand after continuously clashing with sharp rocks. Faced with his client's sudden gesture of care, the delivery boy could only stand there stunned in amazement and total bewilderment. Li Sang's face instantly turned bright red. He stammered out that he was fine and secretly wondered if this girl was genuinely worried about him. Seonha let out an exasperated sigh. She bluntly scolded him for being a thick-skulled idiot who left others speechless with his insensitivity. The young girl suddenly flew into a rage, grabbing him by the collar and screaming, asking if those hands were made of steel or diamonds that he dared to act as recklessly as an amateur. Seonha sternly issued a final warning that if he pulled any more stupid stunts, she would immediately fire him with no questions asked. Right when the atmosphere was at peak tension, the old deliverman's hearty laughter suddenly echoed from behind, making both of them turn their heads simultaneously. Old man Kim Taeksa lay flat on the ground with a bruised face. He smiled meaningfully and advised the girl not to be too harsh, as her boyfriend was truly a capable young man. Old man Kim Taeksa expressed his deep gratitude to Li Sang for awakening the deliveryman's spirit within him, while promising to live a more honest life from now on. He sincerely offered his help, arguing that no matter how strong the two were, they would still need the wisdom and sharpness of a seasoned veteran. Li Sang coldly brushed it off, believing a defeated loser had no right to offer support. He even flatly refused to help the old man lying paralyzed on the floor. Standing before the crushed remains of the motorcycle, Seonha casually demanded he walk to the next location, making Lee Sang secretly admire her meticulous calculation. Amidst the silent street, Kim Taek-soo's haunting prophecy rang out that sooner or later, both of them would have to face death. The old man lying flat on the ground emphasized that this was a serious warning upon discovering that both their names had been placed on the highly dangerous priority delivery list. Both Lee Sang and Seonha were stunned by this information. They hurriedly pressed the old man to explain what the hell this priority order actually was. Seonha clearly showed panic, holding her head in thought. She feared that things were happening so fast she wouldn't have enough time to formulate a new plan. Kim Taek-soo lay there screaming because he was being ignored. He continuously questioned the connection between the two and wondered if that guy was truly a deliveryman. The backdrop of the city at night appeared alongside the explanation of priority delivery, where swarms of deliverymen compete for a single target, and the bounty goes only to the one who finishes it first. Seonha clutched her head in deep stress upon realizing that being on the priority delivery list meant becoming the common hunted target for every deliveryman out there. Kim Taek-soo, lying flat on the ground, weakly warned that enemies would trail them 24 hours a day to carry out a relentless manhunt. Lee Sang bowed his head to let the shadows obscure his gaze, softly muttering an admission that the current situation was indeed incredibly troublesome. But right after, he broke into an excited smile, his face showing clear delight as he declared that everything was unfolding perfectly. The delivery boy excitedly clapped his hands loudly, sparing no words to thank Chairman Seonha for giving him the absolute best opportunity to make money and fight. Kim Taek-soo laughed heartily at his opponent's madness. He admitted that Lee Sang was his new idol and earnestly proposed that they become partners. The response to that enthusiasm was a harsh rejection, demanding the old man stop his delusional daydreaming about a collaboration that would never happen. Seonha stood looking down from above with full authority. She sternly declared that the old man would never have a chance to be a partner after daring to get in the way of her business. Still sprawling on the ground, Kim Taek-soo stubbornly asserted that he was a professional deliveryman who acted strictly for compensation and absolutely not out of personal feelings. A red collar suddenly dropped right next to the old man, acting as a highly suggestive ending sign for the clash of those living in the underground delivery world. Seonha looked down at the red collar lying bare on the floor, coldly asserting that she absolutely did not need an equal partner. The young girl's glowing red eyes flashed with cruelty. She reached out her hand and boldly declared she would only take the old man in if he volunteered to be her loyal dog. Old man Kim Taek-soo lay sprawled on the ground, quietly looking at the collar as if weighing a highly humiliating but necessary trade-off. Suddenly, the old deliveryman blushed and blurted out a shamelessly flirtatious remark, saying that if he were a few years younger, he definitely would never hide his feelings for her. Lee Sang, standing nearby, couldn't help but shiver in disgust. He silently mocked the madness of them both for uttering such cheesy words right at a bloody scene. The two began moving toward the final delivery point on the list, with Seonha reminding him that time was running out since they had become priority hunting targets. A dry click echoed as the red leather collar was locked tightly around chubby Minseep's neck, officially stripping away all his freedom. Seonha coldly gripped the leash and declared that this coward was the perfect replacement to make up for the shattered phones. The young girl's red eyes shone with fierce determination as she thought about the precious data and information she had to retrieve at all costs. She decisively dragged the miserably screaming Minseep away, swearing she would make him spit out every single hidden secret down to the very last piece of information. The brilliant sunset gradually fell, blanketing the city's closely packed skyscrapers in a magical red-orange hue. Lee Sang stood in the middle of the quiet schoolyard. He looked up high and wondered if this was truly today's final delivery location. With a resolute face, Seonha checked her phone and coldly confirmed that the toughest challenge was now lying right ahead. Under the windy evening sky, the two silently strode toward the school gate in a terrifyingly still atmosphere. The delivery boy complained regretfully as he walked, demanding the girl compensate him for his perfect attendance award, which had been ruined by this mission. Seonha calmly explained that leaving this place for last was a logical calculation aimed at avoiding chaos in front of other students. Right at that moment, old man Kim Taek-soo appeared with a gleeful face, proudly announcing that he had tied up the prey securely, just as agreed. In the back of the truck bed, chubby Minseep was tightly wrapped in layer upon layer of safety straps, only able to groan in absolute helplessness. The old deliveryman swaggered over and expressed his admiration for the young girl's cold demeanor, while asserting that her boldness was very much to his taste. As he stepped up the stairs, he joked that a 30-year age gap no longer mattered now, and suggested that Seonha feel free to call him Big Brother. Lee Sang frowned as he smelled the blood and dust lingering in the air. He secretly thought that a purge must have occurred right before they stepped foot in here. Seonha held her head high with a cold look, asserting that she herself had also early noticed the abnormal signs enveloping the entire school. Their eyes turned towards the strange delivery motorcycle parked all alone next to the school gate like a chilling warning from a mysterious intruder. The intended target was the window of the student council room located on the 5th floor, which was radiating a gloomy and eerily quiet atmosphere. Seonha noticed that the blackout curtains, which were always kept closed, were now wide open with bright lights, an ominous change hinting at a tragedy that had just taken place. Standing in the middle of the hallway with Lee Sang and Old Man Kim, the young girl suspected that someone had interfered to ruin the most important order of the day. Her glowing red eyes dropped in deep thought. Seonha worried that they themselves might be the actual targets being put in the crosshairs. Amidst the quiet atmosphere, a mysterious figure suddenly revealed itself from the end of the dark hallway and loomed toward the three of them. The stranger in the light-colored protective suit coldly reprimanded their tardiness, and casually bragged that he had finished off everyone in the student council room a long time ago. Smiling maniacally with fresh blood still on his hands, Bae Minjun claimed that because he was too bored while waiting, he had wiped clean all the remaining lives in this school. Old Man Kim Taeksu shockingly observed the deserted school, secretly lamenting that not a single student had survived except for those in the student council room. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed in the hallway, signaling the presence of an arrogant killer, one who did not even bother to follow the most basic rules of the trade. The old shipper angrily pointed his finger at the opponent, shouting that slaughtering outside the scope of the order was an act of breaking the unspoken rules and the very reason he was considered a mediocre guy. The response to that lecture was just a disdainful snap of the fingers from the opponent, creating faint streaks of light preparing for a lightning-fast attack. Bae Minjun dashed past Kim Taeksu with the speed of lightning, his overwhelming skill making even the seasoned old man freeze for a moment. The assassin in the light-colored suit muttered in annoyance, coldly warning the old shipper never to point that finger at him ever again. A splash of dark blood suddenly splattered from a deep wound on the old man's body, proving the finishing blow had just been executed silently and ruthlessly. He casually swiped his phone and declared that he no longer had any interest in the weak, while ordering everyone to quickly get out of his sight. Bae Minjun admitted that at first he had intended to kill everyone just to get it over with, thinking that the mission of hunting down a high school girl was too simple and boring. However, a maniacal smile suddenly appeared clearly on the assassin's face as he asserted that his excitement had truly exploded the moment he saw the picture of the target. Bae Minjun laughed maniacally through his protective visor, smugly asking if they knew how excited he was when he received this hunting mission. He showed his phone screen, boasting that the target's information was exactly Song Seonha, the 18-year-old schoolgirl standing right in front of him with a shocked expression. Lee Sang stared in astonishment at the girl's personal profile displayed on the phone, secretly horrified to realize the opponent was actually targeting his master. The blue-suited assassin approached with a sinister smile, giving a social greeting after many days apart, and asserting that the two were originally old friends in the same boat. Facing that provocation, Lee Sang still kept a cold, resolute face to hide the fierce turmoil happening inside his heart. Bae Minjun slightly bowed his head mysteriously, the eyes faintly visible behind his helmet radiating a gloomy murderous intent that made the atmosphere suffocating. The orange-shirted delivery boy quietly looked down, seemingly trying to bury the unpleasant memories about this cold-blooded collie. Seonha instinctively turned her head to look with a gaze full of suspicion, secretly sensing a shady connection existing between the two men before her eyes. The young girl's face became extremely tense, her mind constantly questioning the true identity of the killer who had just claimed to be Lee Sang's friend. Seonha bluntly demanded a satisfactory explanation about what was going on, while Lee Sang remained standing in silence with a troubled and unpredictable look. Lee Sang smirked slightly, coldly correcting to Seonha that the guy opposite wasn't exactly a friend but more like a thorn in his side that needed to be plucked out. Suddenly the blue-suited guy reached out intending to grab the girl, but a rock-hard hand promptly blocked that dirty attack in midair. The battle officially erupted as Lee Sang used his overwhelming strength to push back the enemy, creating an absolute safe boundary for his client. Bae Minjun tilted his head in amusement, dropping a sarcastic remark asking if he was risking his life to protect this girl out of love or just a ridiculous habit. The delivery boy firmly asserted that Seonho was merely a client, and he acted entirely for the goal of a reward rather than superfluous emotions. With a resolute gaze, Lee Sang demanded the opponent to leave the girl alone and focus all his strength on settling the grudge between the two men right here. The assassin's eyes gleamed with cruelty behind the protective visor, signaling a bloody hurricane about to be unleashed upon the deserted hallway. He yelled that those were just garbage words and then suddenly launched himself to attack at a terrifying speed beyond any calculation. Lee Sang braced himself to withstand the earth-shattering collision, sparks flying to prove the tremendous power from the professional assassin's strike. Bae Minjun unleashed a vicious move aiming at his opponent's weak point, smiling faintly as he asked whether a weakling like him had enough guts to protect anyone. Lee Sang rushed in to shield Seonha, knocking away the enemy's tricky attack by a hair's breadth. He held the girl tightly, his eyes blazing with flames of anger as the opponent began to unleash cruel techniques aimed at an innocent person. A sharp cut grazed across Seonha's neck, causing fresh blood to splatter, marking the brutality of an uncompromising confrontation. Bae Minjun approached with a sinister smile, sarcastically asking whether Lee Sang had truly forgotten the brutal nature of them both. The blue-suited assassin appeared extremely excited, asserting that no matter how he tried to escape, he couldn't break free from the shadow of the past. He continued throwing bitter words, questioning the miserable fate of those he once swore to protect until his last breath. Lee Sang remained silent with a darkened face full of gloom, while the opponent endlessly mocked his pointlessness over the past time. Bae Minjun launched a stormy attack, admitting that Lee Sang's absurd strength was still a highly formidable obstacle. The continuous clashes created a terrifying pressure, forcing the delivery boy to step back against the relentless and frantic assault of his old friend. He gritted his teeth in high concentration, telling himself that he must regain the initiative thanks to his advantage in speed and top-notch practical combat techniques. Bae Minjun smirked, declaring that even though they had never truly determined a winner when fighting one-on-one with an obstacle like Seonha, Lee Sang's ending was all too clear. He launched a powerful attack that made Lee Sang struggle to shield the girl, simultaneously throwing sarcastic remarks about his life pretending to be a happy schoolboy all this time. The blue-suited assassin laughed maniacally behind his protective visor, judging that this very softness had caused the old partner's prowess to fade significantly. Facing Lee Sang's murderous glare, Bae Minjun coldly demanded him to throw away this fake disguise and return to the old path. Meanwhile, Seonha shockingly raised her hand to touch the bleeding wound on her neck, feeling the freezing pain beginning to seep deep into her body. Looking at the dark red fresh blood smudged all over her palm, the young girl stunningly realized the cruel extent of the battle she was being dragged into. Seonha's glowing red eyes suddenly became cold and full of hatred, as if a fierce survival instinct was beginning to rise strongly inside her. Without letting the opponent strike again, Lee Sang decisively stomped his foot hard on the floor to gather momentum for a highly resolute counterattack. He forcefully pushed Seonha out of the danger zone just as the assassin closed in, accepting to face the cold-blooded enemy head-on all by himself. Faced with that surprising and valiant resistance, Bae Minjun could only stand stunned and doubtful upon realizing the pace of the match had completely changed. Lee Sang stared intently at his opponent with eyes full of murderous intent, silently affirming that this battle would no longer have room for meaningless jokes. Bae Minjun burst into maniacal laughter, sarcastically asking if he was trying to use his looks to seduce him and mocking whether his old friend had truly fallen for this girl or not. The blue-suited assassin raised an eyebrow in amazement mixed with mockery upon hearing the opponent consider him merely a weakling at a disadvantage. Seonha unexpectedly appeared with glowing red eyes full of resentment, coldly licking the blood on her finger and growling a demand for him to repeat those arrogant words one more time. Bae Minjun's eyes suddenly shrank in shock. He couldn't believe the deadly murderous intent radiating from a seemingly frail schoolgirl. Right at that moment, a decisive hand reached out and tightly squeezed the opponent's wrist to prevent any further attacking intentions. Seonha coordinated perfectly by using both hands to tightly cover the visor on Minjun's helmet, completely stripping away the assassin's vision. He groaned in pain and cursed furiously upon realizing he was being humiliatingly subdued by the very people he originally despised. Taking advantage of this once-in-a-millennium opening, a steel hand quickly grabbed the opponent's collar to lock down the target for the decisive blow. Li Sang threw a lightning punch that crushed the blue-suited assassin's face, while Seonha still held the prey tightly to ensure the most brutal punishment. Li Sang smirked as he observed his opponent, secretly assessing that the assassin's move turned out to be much more interesting and tricky than he had imagined. Seonha, despite being exhausted, still tried to stand firm, proudly asserting that she was absolutely not a burden or a stumbling block to anyone. Suddenly Li Sang rushed forward to subdue his opponent with a dangerous martial arts move, his hand tightly clutching the blue-suited assassin's neck in an explosive moment. While suppressing the enemy, the young girl standing behind coldly corrected that she had absolutely no romantic relationship with the orange-shirt delivery boy as he mistakenly thought. Dark red fresh blood began dripping onto the cold floor from a horrifying wound, evidencing the extreme brutality of the clash they had just gone through. Old man Kim Taeksu gritted his teeth and screamed in agony, his face completely distorted by the shock of realizing he had just suffered too great a loss. The old shipper knelt on the ground, his hand clutching his severed wrist, while Li Sang silently stood looking down and called out coldly. He calmly requested the old man to quickly pick up the dropped wrist, while reminding him that if he acted fast, doctors could still reattach it. Kim Taeksu looked up with eyes full of hope mixed with shock, stuttering as he asked again if that arm could truly still be salvaged. Li Sang decisively affirmed that he knew a place fully capable of performing this reconstructive surgery, officially lighting up the final ray of hope for the pitiful old man. Li Sang watched Seonha's back as she advanced deep into the dark hallway and hurriedly asked where she intended to go at this time. The young girl coldly replied without bothering to turn her head, asserting that if he intended to find a working phone, it was already too late. He grabbed the blue-suited assassin by the collar and coldly commented that despite his sloppy appearance, deep inside he was an extremely meticulous guy. Seonha stated with certainty that the guy had smashed all the witnesses' phones right at the beginning of the purge to silence them. Li Sang looked up at the high floor with a haunted face, secretly thinking the scene inside the student council room was undoubtedly a horrifying disaster no one would want to witness. The young girl quietly walked away and reminded him not to cross the line by deliberately caring about her mental state right now. The orange-shirt delivery boy screamed angrily in his heart, silently complaining that even when he was sincerely worried, the other party only knew how to utter harsh words. Suddenly Seonha stopped and pointed her finger at the one lying defeated at Li Sang's feet, making the atmosphere abruptly awkward. Her sharp eyes were full of contempt as she questioned him why he could call such a cold-blooded killer his friend. Li Sang gritted his teeth, asserting that he was absolutely not a friend, but when asked back about the real relationship between the two, he could only give a bitter, faint smile. Li Sang stomped his foot hard onto the enemy's chest and coldly mocked that if he had to give him a name, a stalker would be the most reasonable choice. Bae Minjun gritted his teeth in resentment, both lamenting the cruelty of his old friend and feeling extremely annoyed seeing him still this clear-headed. The orange-shirt delivery boy stood imposingly in the hallway, casually recounting that the two only happened to cross paths a few times in their old job, but because this guy kept stalking and causing trouble, he had decisively cut ties. The blue-suited assassin, despite being held up by the collar, still jokingly claimed it was true friendship, irritating Li Sang into reminding him that real friends should be helpful to each other instead of doing stupid things. His eyes suddenly became gloomy and cold. He firmly declared that he would lend the opponent a hand by punching him right back to sleep. Bae Minjun glanced at Seonha standing at the end of the hallway and warned her that she had found the wrong person to rely on, because this orange-shirt delivery boy was truly a dangerous monster. He lay flat on the floor and wheezed to ask the girl if she truly knew who she was tagging along with, as the guy in front of her was the one standing at the apex of the power ladder in South Korea. In the gloomy space, the mysterious schoolgirl's true identity was exposed by the assassin when he asserted that she was the daughter of the big shot Song Jae-kyo. Li Sang looked down blankly with a face full of skepticism, casually asking in return who Song Jae-kyo was to make him act so incredibly shocked. Ignoring his ignorance, Bae Minjun dropped a final warning that Seonha wasn't someone he could deal with, and didn't understand why he got involved with someone like her. Bae Minjun lay flat on the floor with a bloody face, wheezing directions to go to Songchangdong to look for someone named Jungjin. The assassin's smile suddenly became twisted as he asserted that was where she would find the true identity of the person who murdered her father. He raised a mocking thumb toward Li Sang and asked if that information was enough to be considered a great help. Suddenly a dull thud echoed as Sionha's heavy school bag struck straight down onto the blue-suited guy's head, causing blood to splatter. Sionha gritted her teeth in anger, screaming that a piece of trash like him had no right to drag her late father's name out to mock it. The young girl's glowing red eyes radiated intense murderous intent as she threatened to truly end his life if he refused to confess the whole truth. Responding to that rage was still Minjun's playful attitude, laughing and sarcastically saying that from now on she and her delivery boy boyfriend could go find out for themselves. Just as Sionho was about to swing her bag for the next strike, a decisive black-gloved hand reached out to stop that frantic action. Li Sang quietly stood between the two and coldly declared that everything should stop here because the opponent was no longer capable of resisting. Bei Minjun looked at his old partner's back and gave a faint laugh, asserting that he was trying to cover it up because he thought they were both monsters of the same kind. Li Sang coldly asserted that all interrogation efforts were useless because this assassin had been trained never to open his mouth since childhood. He looked at Sionho with concern and reminded her that even if she continued to beat him like that, it would only make herself more exhausted. Facing the young girl's heavy gaze, the delivery boy advised her to start thinking about the next destination instead of wasting time here. Sionha quietly walked past Li Sang, a gentle touch on the shoulder like a tacit acknowledgement of the grim reality they were both facing. She left the school hallway in a frightening silence, leaving behind the opponent who lay gasping for breath amidst cold drops of sweat. The scene suddenly shifted to the neon-lit Jianghua Street, where dark corners always hid the pains of growing up. Amidst the quiet space, a flip phone suddenly vibrated violently with a notification ready to accept a new delivery order. A hand wearing exquisite antique rings gently touched the screen, officially starting a whirlpool of fate that had just been sent. The woman with elaborately styled high hair quietly observed the device, exuding a mysterious and dangerous aura of nobility. Sitting majestically in a heavily traditional-style room, she softly announced to her subordinates that a new order had officially appeared. The powerful woman observed the trembling schoolgirls and coldly ordered her subordinates to bring back those of value without leaving a single scratch, while for the guy collapsing amidst the arrows, she ruthlessly demanded to tear him apart to throw to the vicious dogs. Taking a long puff of her cigarette, she asserted that every purge must be executed in a truly refined and high-class manner. Back to the present, the assassin Bei Minjun was tightly bound by a series of protective straps, his face showing clear wretchedness as he suddenly became a delivery cargo. Li Sang stood watching the ridiculous scene as both his old friend and the fat young master were tied tightly together, and couldn't help but utter sarcastic comments about their bizarre nature. He decisively slapped his hand hard on the truck bed to signal the official start of this secret escort journey. Old man Kim Taeksu, while preparing to depart, anxiously asked again whether bringing these two guys to the right address would truly help him reattach his severed arm. Standing under the quiet night light, Li Sang affirmed that it was a disguised underground hospital and as long as he gave his name, all medical issues would be handled smoothly. Sionho approached with a sharp gaze and threatened the old man not to dare try to escape, because his necklace was already equipped with a tracking device. The old delivery man hurriedly raised his thumb to reassure that since he had received the deposit, he would absolutely complete the task, while telling her not to worry too much and just trust his skills. Li Sang and Sionha quietly stood watching old man Kim's truck fade into the dark, ending a chaotic chapter at the school. Suddenly the girl threw an object toward him, forcing the delivery boy to use lightning-fast reflexes to catch it right in midair. He stared in astonishment at the object in his black-gloved palm and questioned the true intention of the mysterious client. Sionha casually asserted that his old vehicle was completely wrecked and demanded him to use the vehicle corresponding to this key. The orange-shirt delivery boy blankly observed the small object in his hand, seemingly unable to believe the young girl's sudden generosity. He suddenly became excited and spared no words praising Sionha as the best boss in the world for granting him this privilege. However, Sionha's cold look quickly extinguished that joy when she revealed this was actually the vehicle of the assassin Bei Minjun. It turned out she had been extremely crafty, taking advantage of the moment Minjun closed in on her to secretly snatch the key right out of his coat pocket. She decisively declared that today's order was completed, leaving Li Sang standing dazed with a face full of disgust and judgment. He continuously muttered criticisms about his enemy's trashy taste and swore that he would buy a new vehicle immediately after receiving his hefty reward. Seonha casually got on the newly stolen blue motorcycle, leaving Li Sang standing and watching from behind with a thoroughly weary face. The delivery boy sluggishly scratched his head and announced that he was too exhausted to escort her home right now. His eyes widened in astonishment when he received an unexpected counter-question from the mysterious client. Seonha coldly asserted that no matter what, she was preparing to head to his house. She casually suggested that they both ride together on one vehicle to save time and ensure safety. Li Sang stood frozen like a statue, his mind suddenly going completely blank at this excessively bold proposal. He yelled in extreme panic, unable to comprehend why this girl intended to invade his private space. With an expressionless face, Seonha reminded him to look back at the wreckage at her house yesterday to understand the current level of danger. She emphasized that being on the priority delivery list made her a hunting target 24 hours a day. Ignoring Li Sang's stunned expression, Seonha decisively asserted that protecting her anytime and anywhere was an inseparable part of the contract. Seonha asserted that no matter what happened, Li Sang was required to always stay by her side without leaving a single step. The young girl's glowing red eyes drilled deep into his mind, coldly reminding whether he had already forgotten the commitments in the contract. Facing that imposition, the delivery boy could only break into a cold sweat upon receiving a firm command requiring him to start the engine and depart immediately. Li Sang angrily slapped his hand hard on the seat, unable to believe the reckless boldness of the schoolgirl sitting in front of him. He leaned close to Seonha's face and demanded to know if she was truly aware of the severity of her proposal. With a stern demeanor, he questioned if she understood the dangerous implication of a woman going to the house of a single man. Li Sang's gaze suddenly became razor-sharp, challenging that no matter how thoroughly she investigated, she couldn't guarantee she would be completely safe. Contrary to that harshness, Seonha maintained her composure and casually admitted that she herself wasn't sure about that either. She slightly parted her lips to drop a seductive challenge that left Li Sang completely frozen, astounded by her recklessness. Seonha looked straight into his eyes and repeated the demand to go ahead, while asserting he could do whatever he wanted without hesitation. Seonha coldly asserted that if this helped with future orders, she completely accepted giving him full authority to do whatever he wanted. Li Sang sank into silence with wavering eyes, seemingly undergoing a fierce internal struggle against the client's excessively bold proposal. He gritted his teeth and cursed bitterly, then clenched his black-gloved hand to punch the seat hard to suppress the surging embarrassment inside. The delivery boy decisively turned away, coldly asserting that she was absolutely not his type and going with a disgusting person like her only made him more irritated. He crossly threw the cracked helmet to Seonha, curtly announcing that his house had only one single set of bedding so she would have to manage on her own. His hand decisively twisted the throttle to prepare to start the engine, officially taking the stubborn girl away from the gloomy school. The vehicle sped off into the night. Li Sang still didn't forget to look back and sarcastically warn in advance that his shabby apartment didn't even have a bidet sprayer. Their journey ended at Yanhwa Villa, an old and dilapidated apartment complex nestled among the city's high-rise buildings. Returning to the cramped room, the schoolboy sluggishly lay stretched out on the floor and scrolled through his phone to check his financial status after an eventful day. His face suddenly distorted completely from extreme shock upon seeing the crypto chart plummet to rock bottom at minus 99.9%, causing all hopes of changing his life to vanish into thin air. Li Sang clutched his stomach in pain, secretly calling himself a fool as he witnessed the stubbornness of the girl who had just casually stepped into his house over a casual invitation. He shockingly stared at the shattered phone screen displaying the rock-bottom financial chart, while Seonha still sat quietly huddling mysteriously in the corner of the room. With bandages on her face, the young girl looked up with glowing red eyes exuding melancholy yet steadfast determination, making the space suddenly feel suffocating. Sweat pouring down his dazed face, the delivery boy felt like his head was about to explode, unable to believe he was harboring such a crazy person. Amidst the quiet atmosphere, Seonha slightly moved her lips to utter a cold word of permission, urging the other party to just go ahead and start executing his intentions. Li Sang froze in utter astonishment when she clearly repeated the command, asserting that he could do whatever he wanted without hesitation. He completely fell into a state of mental breakdown, secretly hating himself for foolishly bringing such a dangerous character back to his own residence. Lying stretched out on the floor with lifeless eyes, he bitterly concluded that getting involved with this woman would surely lead to an unpleasant ending. Lee Sang's gaze suddenly hardened, swearing to himself that as soon as he received the full reward money, he would immediately leave and never look back. Responding to that avoidance was a powerful and haunting look from Seonha, like a tacit affirmation that the vortex of fate between them had only just begun. Seonha crossed her arms and sat quietly in the cramped room, her cold demeanor making the space suddenly full of pressure. Her white-socked legs were neatly crossed, proving the strict upbringing of a young lady even in dilapidated surroundings. Lee Sang scratched his head in confusion, ordering himself to stay completely alert so as not to get caught up in the bizarre thoughts taking place. Looking at his phone screen displaying the fried chicken order about to arrive, he told himself that all distraction right now was just due to his starving stomach protesting. Suddenly Seonha leaned close and casually asserted that she actually preferred seasoned chicken over regular fried chicken. The young girl crawled across the floor toward him, secretly complaining that this was her first time eating delivery chicken and she originally wanted to choose a different dish, but he had already ordered it. Lee Sang's eyes widened with a face flushed in amazement, unable to believe that there was someone in the world who had never tasted the national delivery chicken dish. He quietly folded his phone, trying to maintain his composure before the unbelievable innocence of the young lady standing in front of him. Sitting kneeling in a formal manner, Seonha began to recount the premium fried chicken dishes prepared by her family's professional butler. Memories of luxurious meals returned as she sadly shared that her powerful father had never allowed outside food to enter the mansion. More than anything else in this world, Seonha always cherished the simple yet extremely warm moments with her loved ones. To her, the greatest happiness was seeing her beloved father return home to have dinner, even if sometimes it was just a rare single time a day. But then an unexpected event occurred at the brilliantly lit luxury apartment building, marking the beginning of a painful chain of tragedies. On that fateful day, her father had sent an apology message because of a busy schedule, so he couldn't come home for dinner with his daughter as usual. Amidst the vast and empty space of the luxury apartment, Seonha had to sit alone because even the butler had an emergency and couldn't cook. Hunger began to gnaw at her when she accidentally saw the image of glossy and appealing spicy rice cakes being advertised on the TV screen. Seonha slightly swallowed her saliva with wide eyes and craving, never expecting that the only time she ordered a delivery herself 2 years ago would be a fatal mistake. While she was completely glued to her phone, the doorbell suddenly rang, shattering the quiet atmosphere of the dark room. From the other side of the door, a stranger's voice rang out announcing that the delivery item had arrived, preparing for a bloody raid. Without a shred of suspicion, the young girl hurriedly called out to confirm and prepared to open the door, completely unaware that death was waiting right before her eyes. Seonha's hand gently grabbed the doorknob as she called out outside for the delivery person to wait a moment. As the door opened slightly, the young girl was suddenly stunned in amazement to see a person in a protective suit and a tight hood standing sullenly in front of the house. Seonha's glowing red eyes suddenly contracted, clearly showing panic mixed with fear at the highly abnormal appearance of the uninvited guest. The mysterious figure casually held up the food bag, concealing his vicious murderous intent under the guise of an ordinary delivery worker. But her extremely sharp eyes managed to promptly lock onto the badge with a strange symbol carefully embroidered on his chest. Returning to reality, the young girl looked straight at Lee Sang with an extremely tense face, and seriously demanded to know if he thought all of that was just a coincidence. Horror rose once again in her mind as she remembered the darkest day of her life, the day her innocence was shattered by a disgusting crime. That was the image of a razor-sharp knife drenched in fresh blood, a brutal proof of the first and only time she manually placed a delivery order. And it was also the fateful day that forced her to witness with her own eyes her powerful father being brutally assassinated with a series of stabs right in his office. With eyes full of resentment, the girl bit her lip tightly and asserted that the perpetrator was none other than the delivery worker who knocked on her door that night. Seonha looked straight at the opponent, and coldly remarked that the murderer from back then looked very much like him. She decisively asserted that she did not believe this was just a random coincidence at all and began to suspect the delivery boy's true identity. Lee Sang could only look up to the sky and complain in absolute helplessness before the continuous troubles flooding in. Seonha looked down thoughtfully, admitting that everything was gradually becoming extremely troublesome and beyond all initial calculations. Suddenly Li Sang kept silent to listen to a strange sound, warning that there were at least 2 people lurking outside and they were certainly not chicken delivery guys. He scratched his head in intense frustration, secretly complaining that this was exactly why he didn't want to harbor her, and worrying about who would pay for this late-night surcharge. Seonha still maintained a firm attitude as she reminded him that he was also one of those on the top suspect list. In the middle of the old room, the atmosphere suddenly became extremely tense as 2 wounded souls began to scrutinize each other. Li Sang was sullen with gloomy eyes, telling himself that if it was truly her or anyone related to her behind this, he would not show mercy. Responding to that threat was Seonha's highly resolute assertion that she would absolutely not let him escape the grasp of the truth. Li Sang secretly cursed himself for being so unlucky as his kindness was repaid with horrific destruction, right when a figure was thrown flying through the glass door. He narrowed his eyes in astonishment, trying to calm down before the chaos and danger that suddenly rushed into his room. Decisively opening the door to step out onto the rooftop, the delivery boy was stunned to realize that he had officially entered the crosshairs of some big shots. Before his eyes was a mysterious man in a long trench coat coldly grabbing another colleague by the neck amidst a pile of scattered corpses. The subdued man screamed miserably in despair, begging for a fragile salvation as death was already close at hand. The assassin slightly tilted his head to observe with lifeless eyes, exuding a heavy pressure that made the atmosphere suffocating. Without a single word of explanation, he casually used his foot to crush the prey's helmet to show off his brutal power. Standing under the quiet night sky, he quietly turned around to question whether he was indeed Li Sang, the one he had been searching for all this time. With each steady step advancing closer, the assassin carried an aura of nobility but was no less deadly. Suddenly he proactively reached out his hand to propose a cooperation, officially dragging Li Sang into a new game of life and death with no way out. The mysterious man quietly withdrew his hand and introduced himself as Yang Ji-woo to officially begin the confrontation. Responding to that social greeting was Li Sang's cold and contemptuous gaze, a man who seemed to too thoroughly understand traps disguised as politeness. He bluntly demanded the opponent to get lost and declared that he absolutely never had the habit of shaking hands with men. Yang Ji-woo slightly smirked with an unpredictable face, muttering that it turned out things were developing in this direction. He slightly nodded, appearing to have understood his opponent's inner thoughts, while secretly preparing for a storm that was about to be unleashed. He mocked himself for accidentally playing the impolite role before deciding to completely shed his noble mask. A blinding streak of light suddenly ripped through the air as Yang Ji-woo launched a lightning attack, forcing Li Sang to use lightning-fast reflexes to dodge. With a razor-sharp gaze he swung his sword in pursuit and growled, asserting that Li Sang's very existence was the most impolite thing right now. The delivery boy stood proudly next to the deep crack on the wall, coldly mocking that the opponent was truly rotten to the core and lacked even the most basic manners. Tightly gripping the hilt of the sword in his hand, the assassin threatened that from now on he would make him experience a life full of inescapable horrors. Yang Ji-woo swung the razor-sharp sword forward, growling an insult that his opponent was even lower than a beast. Li Sang angrily shouted that he was a psychopath for daring to casually destroy someone else's rented property amidst the dusty rooftop scene. The assassin's eyes flared with dark, murderous intent as he closed in at a terrifying speed, making the atmosphere suddenly suffocating. A dull crash resounded along with flying sparks, marking the brutality of the uncompromising clash. The white-shirted delivery boy froze for a moment in doubt, seemingly unable to understand his opponent's bizarre technique just now. Standing in the middle of the quiet night, Yang Ji-woo slightly smirked sarcastically, and questioned what that bizarre weapon he was holding actually was. He looked at the metal baton with contempt, coldly challenging whether he truly thought such a toy could cause any harm to him. Li Sang responded with a razor-sharp, resolute gaze, secretly affirming that he would use his own strength to shatter that arrogance. Fresh drops of blood began to seep from his clenched fist. The mysterious man declared that the first thing to deal with was his insolent attitude. Yang Ji-woo pointed his finger at his head threateningly, asserting that his arrogance only stemmed from ignorance, and vowing to help him correct that mistake immediately. Yang Ji-woo smirked, advising his opponent not to be too discouraged or sad, because this failure was not his fault alone. He quietly rested the tip of his sword on the floor and asserted that the real problem lay in the corrupt social system that always created piles of trash and then discarded them carelessly. Li Sang angrily questioned the assassin who broke into his house and rambled about meaningless things, while demanding to know if he was also a delivery boy. The delivery boy's gaze suddenly hardened when the name of his client, Song Xianha, was unexpectedly uttered from the mouth of the guy opposite. Yang Jiwu swung his sword threateningly, coldly declaring his firm intention that he would take the young girl away from this place at all costs. Li Sang thoughtfully observed his shoes and secretly marveled at Xianha's charm when so many people were intentionally intruding into her life. With a resolute face, he firmly asserted that she was his goose that laid golden eggs and challenged him not to dream that he would easily hand her over. Yang Jiwu growled, asserting that Xianha would definitely follow him willingly, because that was 10,000 times better than having to rot alongside pieces of trash. The ultimate battle officially erupted on the dusty rooftop, where two worthy opponents began to measure each other's strength in a tug-of-war stalemate. The assassin stared intently at the target through his razor-sharp blade, secretly affirming that the most brutal punishment had only just officially begun. The epic battle on top of the building was taking place extremely fiercely, with lightning-fast movements ripping through the quiet night. Right at the climax, Sionha unexpectedly appeared at the doorway with a highly authoritative manner, decisively ordering both frantic men to stop their hands immediately. The young girl stepped forward with a tightened, annoyed face, loudly reprimanding Yang Jiwu for taking the liberty to disturb her life in a disorganized manner. Li Sang was stunned into silence when he heard the word brother, uttered so naturally, his mind shaken by the truth of the relationship between his client and the assassin. Despite the intervention, the mysterious man still tightly gripped his weapon with eyes burning with anger, asserting that he absolutely could not show mercy in this situation. He yelled in resentment that he could not accept Sionha going with a low, inferior piece of trash, while expressing his anxiety to the point of losing sleep and appetite over her. Sionha quietly explained to reassure the delivery boy that the opponent was actually not a pervert, and she originally had a plan to introduce him beforehand. With a cold voice, she officially confirmed Yang Jiwu's identity as a high-ranking prosecutor, someone who had silently protected and cared for her since her childhood days. Contrary to that calmness, the prosecutor furiously cursed and swore to crush his opponent into 100 pieces until he had to sneak away like a defeated dog. Amidst the suffocating tension, the young girl only slightly raised a single finger authoritatively to signal the aggressive man to keep absolute silence. Sionha placed her finger on her lips authoritatively, coldly reminding her brother that he was being excessively noisy and disturbing the silence of the room. The young girl's glowing red eyes drilled deep into the opponent, decisively asking whether he was harboring intentions to doubt her judgment. Yang Jiwu suddenly became flustered, hurriedly explaining that he did not mean that at all but was merely too worried about her safety. With an expressionless face, Sionha decisively turned her back to walk into the house and declared that if that was the case, he should have the sense to keep quiet. The young girl ordered everyone to quickly gather inside to sit down together and thoroughly discuss the important upcoming plans. The prosecutor still maintained a menacing face full of murderous intent. Seemingly in his heart he was still brewing extreme hatred for the white-shirt delivery boy. Li Sang slightly smirked with a thoroughly weary look, casually uttering an exclamation about the uninvited arrival of this troublesome man. Amidst the stifling space, the rich aroma of the newly delivered box of fried chicken suddenly wafted out, an ironic detail shattering the hostile atmosphere. The delivery boy's hand decisively filled the cup with soda, preparing for an awkward night feast with his reluctant companions. Sitting kneeling on the floor next to the box of fried chicken, Li Sang casually asked if anyone wanted a drink to officially begin the roundtable conference. The prosecutor Yang Jiwu sat majestically with crossed arms, coldly ordering to throw away the fried chicken box immediately because just looking at it made him feel nauseous. Li Sang gritted his teeth in anger, secretly threatening that if he dared to touch his beloved chicken box, he would suffer catastrophic consequences. Ignoring the animosity between the two men, Sionha casually enjoyed a piece of chicken and asserted that despite the complications, the team had identified the next target. The upcoming destination was exactly Songchangdong, the most infamous and squalid red-light district in South Korea, hiding terrifying secrets. The target they aimed for was a powerful woman nicknamed Jungjin, who had just stepped down from a luxury vehicle amidst the prostration of her subordinates. Sionha smirked with utter contempt when mentioning the name Jungjin, coldly remarking that it was a ridiculous title and laughable to utter. Slightly parting her lips calculatively, the mysterious schoolgirl began to declare the start of a dramatic new purge campaign. With a razor-sharp gaze, Seonha officially named this deadly order, Chicken Delivery, to mark the raid on the enemy's lair. Lee Sang, despite focusing, still broke the atmosphere with a skeptical question about the accuracy of the information obtained from Bae Minjun. The delivery boy firmly asserted that they should not treat that assassin's words as gospel truth, because from the very beginning he had only ever spewed garbage. Yang Jiwoo slightly smirked sarcastically, coldly remarking that Lee Sang's reaction looked so cheap and inferior. Lee Sang furiously growled back, asking what kind of insults the assassin disguised as a prosecutor had just spewed. While munching on the chicken and asserting that he never acted based on unverified information, the prosecutor smugly boasted that exposing lies was his specialty. The delivery boy yelled in resentment upon seeing the opponent, who had just called the chicken dirty, now eating it greedily, while firmly demanding the intruder to immediately leave his apartment. Lee Sang gritted his teeth and cursed, secretly complaining that the very presence of this troublesome man had completely extinguished all his appetite. Unable to bear it any longer, he decisively ordered both him and the accompanying girl to pack up and get out immediately before he truly lost control. A dull clatter sounded as Yang Jiwoo casually tossed the chicken bone into a plastic cup and coldly uttered the highly suggestive number 78. He continued to explain that was exactly the number of battle-hardened delivery assassins who had targeted their heads as soon as the priority delivery order was issued. Lee Sang froze in astonishment when he heard him claim that entire army had been caught secretly before they could touch a single strand of his hair. Yang Jiwoo quietly looked over and dropped a final warning, growling to ask if a naive guy like him was truly aware of the extreme danger he was facing. Yang Jiwoo sat with crossed arms powerfully, coldly asserting that 99% of those who made it onto the priority delivery list were wiped out within just 2 days. He continued to emphasize that the rare survivors all had to beg for protection or flee abroad, so Lee Sang casually sitting and eating chicken right now was absolutely insane. With a dark gaze obscuring half of his face, the prosecutor warned that from now on, even more ruthless and dangerous people would come to take his life. Lee Sang still maintained an indifferent face while the opponent asserted he didn't care about his fate, but feared he would encounter a situation that fists couldn't resolve. Yang Jiwoo drilled into the core issue, demanding to know if a crude guy like him truly had enough ability to protect Lady Seonha's safety against the upcoming attacks. The response to that doubt was just a challenging look from the delivery boy, casually considering that it wasn't a question worth bothering himself about. Lee Sang's gaze suddenly became razor-sharp and full of confidence, firmly declaring that he was a man who had never known the taste of defeat. The mysterious man growled, asserting that losing meant receiving no reward, a grim reality that both thoroughly understood. The tense atmosphere was suddenly ripped open by rapid knocks on the door, forcing everyone present in the room to immediately go into a state of alert. From behind the shattered glass door, the voices of his subordinates echoed, informing the prosecutor that they had completed cleaning up the bloody battlefield. Yang Jiwoo clapped his hands triumphantly, coldly announcing that it was time for the trashy delivery boy to get ready to pack up and vanish from his sight. He quietly stood lost in thought by the wall, the prosecutor's silhouette exuding an air of authority but also full of dark schemes. His trench coat fluttered with each decisive step, marking the end of a conversation heavily reeking of gunpowder. While adjusting his clothes, he called Seonha's name in a low voice and confessed that he still couldn't comprehend her crazy choice. Slightly turning his head back with a sharp gaze, Yang Jiwoo coldly demanded him to use actions to prove he was qualified to stand by her side. His hand tightly gripped the doorknob, growling a threat that if he dared to let Seonha be disappointed, hurt, or shed even a single tear, walking proudly amidst the bloody crime scene traces, he swore that he would hunt down and finish him off at all costs, even if he had to turn the whole world upside down. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the cramped room, leaving a quiet, pressure-filled atmosphere enveloping the remaining 2 people. Lee Sang furiously raised a chicken bone to point at the door, yelling that if the prosecutor dared to break in here again without permission, he would be the one to strike first. Seonha quietly watched the delivery boy's fuming back, seemingly feeling the ridiculous yet sincere protection from her reluctant partner. Lee Sang froze in shock upon witnessing Seonha casually take off her uniform jacket right in the middle of his cramped room. His face distorted from extreme shock, sweat pouring down as he couldn't believe the bold actions beyond all norms of the young lady. Seonha quietly turned her back and slightly complained that she had been completely careless to forget to bring a change of clothes at this time. Sitting kneeling on the floor with a thoroughly indifferent demeanor, the young girl coldly asked if he had anything for her to wear temporarily because she really wanted to take a shower immediately. The delivery boy had to suppress his embarrassment to start spreading the mattress on the floor, trying to arrange a temporary sleeping spot for the uninvited client. He decisively threw the pillow onto the mattress, an action that showed both weariness and a desire to hide the strange disturbances creeping into his mind. Standing silently looking at the newly prepared bedding, Lee Sang secretly felt his life was turning in an extremely troublesome and unpredictable direction. He sank deep into silence with lifeless eyes, seemingly trying to digest all the rapid events that had occurred in just a single short night. Behind the frosted glass radiating steam, Seonha's silhouette appeared mysteriously, like an implicit affirmation of the life and death connection just established between them both. The sudden movement of the bathroom door made Lee Sang hurriedly avert his eyes, officially closing those private moments to prepare for tomorrow's bloody chicken delivery mission. A bare foot stepped out of the steamy bathroom. Seonha decisively asked if these were truly the only clothes he owned. The young girl casually stepped out in a baggy t-shirt, and complained that they smelled as if they had been left neglected in a musty glass cabinet for a very long time. Lee Sang held his head and yelled in panic, firmly demanding the uninvited guest to quickly put on pants before daring to step anywhere near him. Seonha coldly lifted the hem of the shirt to prove she actually had protective wear, making the delivery boy only able to utter a gasp of surprise at her stubbornness. She began to steer the conversation toward tomorrow's mission, asserting that he needed to change into appropriate attire so as not to be detected by the enemy immediately. Seonha firmly ordered the opponent to get enough sleep to maintain his performance, even though Lee Sang was secretly complaining that her presence was driving him crazy. Standing before the only mattress spread in the middle of the floor, both fell into a stifling silence in the old and dilapidated room. The delivery boy grumpily emphasized that he had stated very clearly that there was only a single set of bedding for both of them to use. Responding to that scowl was a cold look and a frightening silence from Seonha, as if she was silently challenging the limits of his endurance. Lee Sang's gaze suddenly became hardened calculatively, telling himself that he must prepare thoroughly for the vortex of death waiting ahead. The lights were out. Seonha's glowing red eyes still glimmered in the darkness like an omen of an unpeaceful night ahead. Lee Sang lay sprawled on the floor with a dazed face, muttering that this was truly the worst situation he had ever had to experience. The delivery boy tossed and turned restlessly in the quiet space, his mind tangled before the pressure-filled presence of the young lady right next to him. Suddenly Seonha spoke up to remind him not to sleep too far away, asserting that closeness was necessary so both could respond in time. The young girl warned in a low voice about unforeseeable dangers that could strike at any time even when they were passing out from exhaustion. Lee Sang's eyes widened in panic upon receiving the command to keep a very close distance, sweat pouring down before the client's decisiveness. The deep night enveloped the old apartment complex, closing a long day full of incidents to prepare for a new purge at dawn. The brilliant morning sunlight shone down upon a mansion of luxurious traditional architecture, hiding dark political conspiracies. A man's hand decisively downed a glass of strong liquor, vying the arrogant indulgence of someone holding power in his hands. That was exactly Ji Woong-soo, the member of the National Assembly for the Songcheng region, who was casually enjoying luxury and officially revealing himself as an important link in the game of life and death. Ji Woong-soo smirked triumphantly, asserting that he had longed to see the beauty again so much that he felt like he was going crazy from waiting. Responding to that enthusiasm was Wool's gentle demeanor as she poured the wine while expressing her deep gratitude for being highly valued by a figure of his stature. With her status as the top jising of the Songcheng region, Chong-woo casually declared she would devote all her efforts to serve and make the assemblyman absolutely satisfied. Ji Woong-soo laughed out loud heartily at the sweet words, sparing no praise for the deadly charm radiating from the girl's every gesture and word. Suddenly he sprang up decisively, his face distorting as he admitted he had reached his limit of endurance, and could not continue the entertainment for another second. He hurriedly excused himself to run and find the restroom, leaving an atmosphere of letdown amidst the luxurious party that was gradually spiraling out of control. The door closed, leaving Chong-woo sitting quietly in the empty room, where the recent glamour suddenly vanished into an eerily spine-chilling silence. The Jising's eyes suddenly became razor-sharp and full of calculation, as if all her previous gentleness was just a perfect mask for a dark conspiracy. Meanwhile, Ji Wungsu was frantically rushing through the traditional hallway, secretly cursing the sudden incident that was ruining his moment of pleasure. Slightly pausing his steps with a face full of doubt, the assemblyman suddenly felt an unusual murderous aura silently surrounding him in the deserted space. In the middle of the quiet traditional hallway, a figure knelt down in a prostrate position full of remorse before the presence of his superior. Ji Wungsu put his hand to his forehead, thoroughly weary, uttering an exclamation about how he had been curious to know who dared to suddenly ruin this private moment. The identity of the kneeling person was quickly determined to be Hyo Yonggang, the powerful chairman leading the famous Yonggang Steel Group. Under the crushing pressure, he hurriedly corrected his term of address from brother to assemblyman, to show absolute deference before the opponent's status. Hyo Yonggang earnestly begged for one last chance to deal with Song Xianha, while guaranteeing to clean up the scene most perfectly this time. Ji Wungsu smirked sarcastically that the opponent truly knew how to kill the mood and blamed him for ignoring all instructions only to meet with failure. The assemblyman brought up Song Jianqiu in a low voice as a testament to extraordinariness, making the space suddenly suffocating with memories of the past. Hyo Yonggang's gaze hardened upon hearing the insults about how some people were so pathetic that they lacked the capacity to handle the trash of a deceased person. Meanwhile, the majestic silhouette of the late chairman appeared from behind, reminiscent of a golden age when every field he touched became powerful. Standing on the podium as a presidential candidate, that powerful man made others wonder if he considered himself the sole entity in this world. Ji Wungsu recalled that they both attended the same university and sarcastically remarked that despite coming from the same school, the gap in their status had now become too vast. Hyo Yonggang's eyes shot with blood and rage, the old man roaring a threat that if he had to fall, he would decisively drag all of them down with him. Responding to that rage was just a disdainful smirk from the assemblyman, who was casually mocking the oversized yet useless ego of the Steel Group chairman. Ji Wungsu laughed while asserting that only those backed by actual, practical competence were qualified to boast so loudly in front of him. Amidst the tense atmosphere, the Jising Chongwol still maintained a mysterious, cold face, seemingly observing every smallest movement of the confrontation silently. His self-esteem trampled to the extreme, Hyo Yonggang decisively ordered to kill the opponent immediately to end this humiliation. Quick as a flash, Chongwol's hand decisively pulled the sharp hairpin out of her hair bun, officially launching a lightning counterattack. The young girl threw herself into the battle at a terrifying speed, blocking the tricky attack of the stranger who was aiming directly at the assemblyman. A splash of dark red blood splattered as the hairpin pierced through the assassin's gloved hand, proving the frightening practical combat strength of the Jising. The chaotic brawl erupted amidst Hyo Yonggang's frantic screaming, while the masked killer still silently radiated a chilling, deadly murderous intent. Chongwol smirked with clear, deep calculation, as if this Jising was silently scheming a highly dangerous plan. Ji Wungsu laughed loudly and clapped triumphantly, asserting that Wool had long seen through everything as soon as the assassin was miserably defeated. Slightly pulling the sharp hairpin out of her hair bun, the young girl gently asked the assemblyman to please wait patiently for a moment. The top Jising stood proudly in the middle of the hall, casually apologizing because her appearance had interrupted the atmosphere. A flock of black crows suddenly took flight from the traditional eaves, signaling a bad omen enveloping the luxurious mansion. Hyo Yonggang knelt collapsed on the floor with a face full of humiliation, trembling as he realized he had completely lost the upper hand. A slender hand decisively squeezed the steel chairman's chin, making his eyes widen in terror at the coldness of the person opposite. Standing amidst the bloody battlefield with corpses scattered everywhere, Chongwol coldly reminded them of the dignity and order of the Jising house. With a razor-sharp, authoritative gaze, she firmly declared that she would personally step forward to take responsibility for handling this man. Ji Wungsu hurriedly spoke up to intervene, suggesting in a low voice that ending the old man's life right now would truly be an act that crossed the line. Hyo Yonggang had his chin tightly squeezed by Chongwol's hand in utter humiliation, sweat pouring off the old man as he felt the coldness from the person opposite. Ji Wungsu decisively grabbed the chairman by the collar and lifted him up, smiling sinisterly and asserting that although the old man was incompetent, he still had value to be exploited. They both casually walked away and decided to squeeze out the last bit of utility from the chairman before officially making a decision at the office. The assemblyman Ji Woong-soo showed a clear face of satisfaction mixed with arrogance, as if all the recent troubles were merely a stepping stone for larger conspiracies. Chong-woo slightly turned her head back with an intensely deep look, exuding the demeanor of someone holding deadly secrets. A hand tightly gripped a blood-stained collar in a terrifying silence, proving the brutality of purges in the shadows. Amidst the courtyard scattered with corpses everywhere, Chong-woo firmly introduced the newly appeared spectacle-wearing woman as her Seo-bang. Standing proudly in the middle of the bloody battlefield, Seo-bang coldly observed the defeated as if to affirm absolute strength. The sullen-looking woman suddenly cheerfully waved to greet that big sister, and announced that all the trash outside had been cleared away. Ji Woong-soo spared no words praising Seo-bang, while Hye Yong-gang could only resentfully blame the assemblyman for sending too many people to hunt him down. Chong-woo was stunned when she felt the continuous vibration from her phone, signaling an urgent message had just been sent in the heat of the moment. On the screen appeared a notification from Madam along with a secret image file, officially triggering a dramatic manhunt in the shadows. The Jising's eyes suddenly narrowed as she saw Lee Seng's profile clearly displayed with a top priority target label marked for elimination. Across the city, the delivery boy and Seonha continued to walk casually, completely unaware that death had already begun calling their names. Immediately after, a portrait of Song Seonha was also officially sent, turning her into the final puzzle piece of a highly lucrative assassination contract. Chong-woo gently raised her phone with a profound and arrogant smile, as if she had long held the fate of her rivals in the palm of her hand. Standing before the luxurious doorway, the top Jising bowed respectfully to bid farewell to Assemblyman Ji Woong-soo, not forgetting to promise an even warmer reception next time. The silhouette of the luxury car gradually disappeared into the darkness, leaving Chong-woo standing in the silent space with newly formed blood-soaked schemes. Softly draped in a regal cloak, she received a definitive notice from her subordinate that the transport was ready to depart immediately. Seo-bang quietly approached and asked in a low voice if the next target was indeed the Sangchangdong red light district, a place harboring the most horrifying secrets. Chong-woo gave a slight nod of confirmation with a deeply pensive gaze, appearing ready for a highly risky move. Looking toward the fading horizon, she silently concluded that she was undoubtedly in for a long, grueling night of work. The destination was the Gyeobang in the Sangchangdong district, a place famously known for its strict unspoken rules and myriad of traps. In the middle of the brightly lit courtyard, a group of young girls stood trembling in a line under the strict supervision of aggressive thugs. The tension escalated as a young girl could not hide her fear, sweating profusely under the vicious scrutiny of the person in charge. The powerful woman coldly remarked that the girl's eyes were asymmetrical and her pupils were so dull they looked lifeless. She continued hurling insults about the girl's parched lips, asserting that she possessed no charm to sway the patrons. A coarse hand tightly gripped the tobacco pipe in sheer contempt, growling disparaging remarks about the scrawny figures and terrible postures of the merchandise. That was Madame, the formidable woman leading the Jising house world, standing majestically as if ready to devour the weak. She glared furiously and loudly demanded that her subordinates immediately explain the terrible quality of the girls just brought in. Madame glared and cursed Kim Jong-cheol as a useless fool right in the courtyard of the Jising house while he constantly stuttered an explanation about the trouble at the high school. Suddenly, a heavyweight punch from the bodyguard Bayan Jaemin landed, sending the errand boy flying straight into the air in utter shock. The bald giant stood imposingly, coldly shouting at the man for daring to insolently talk back to Madame in front of all the subordinates. Madame gripped her pipe tightly, growling that this exact incompetence was why he would forever remain a lowly errand boy instead of a true bodyguard. She continued to blow smoke contemptuously, mocking that if he couldn't bring in high schoolers, he should have at least brought middle schoolers as replacements. Amidst the suffocating atmosphere caused by Madame's rage, a mysterious figure suddenly appeared right at the mansion's main gate. The young man with bright blonde hair stood tall in a striking orange outfit, exuding a cold and utterly unpredictable demeanor. Madame slightly narrowed her eyes in suspicion, secretly wondering who this stranger was to possess such a bizarrely terrifying confidence. With a highly disdainful tone, the powerful woman demanded to know which Jising house's errand crew he actually belonged to dare break into this place. The orange-clad delivery boy gave a slight smirk, almost revealing the name of the fight delivery organization before coldly apologizing for his delay. Lee Bongyu briefly glanced at the strange object in his hand with a deeply thoughtful expression, seemingly calculating a very risky move in silence. He casually admitted his true identity, as Lee Bangyu, a name already all too familiar among delivery boys who hunt for lucrative prey. Standing amidst the ancient mansion, he reiterated the information that Madame was desperately searching for a potential girl to train into a top jising. Bowing his head slightly beside the mysterious guest, he muttered an assertion that he had to go through countless hardships just to bring this girl here safely. The young woman stood there quietly in a highly regal modernized hanbok, her hands gripping a paper fan as if to conceal a shocking secret. Lee Bangyu boldly assured his superior that the moment anyone saw her appearance, they would absolutely nod in complete satisfaction. Hidden behind the brim of the conical hat, Seonha's crimson eyes appeared full of coldness and hatred, signaling that a blood-soaked purge was about to begin. The scene suddenly shifted to a gloomy narrow alley in Sangchangdong, where the dim neon lights could not dispel the atmosphere of sin. In the quiet space, an aggressive man forcefully cornered the young girl against the wall, ignoring all threats of calling the police to carry out his evil intentions. With a sinister smile, he openly lured his prey into the path of a jising and affirmed that her beauty was the most perfect money-making tool. The insolent man smiled smugly, thinking he already had the prey securely in his grasp in the deserted alley. Suddenly, a lightning-fast punch from Lee Sang smashed squarely into his face, completely cutting off his arrogance and sending him flying away in astonishment. He continued to pin his opponent against the cracked wall, coldly observing that the man's physique seemed quite similar to his own size. While stripping off the defeated man's orange jacket, the delivery boy clicked his tongue, complaining about reluctantly having to execute this troublesome disguise plan. Seonha, in a dazzling jising outfit, stood opposite him and firmly declared that this was a necessary step to infiltrate deep into the enemy's lair. The young girl explained that disguising themselves was the only way they could blend into the crowd without being detected by any pursuers. Looking at the phone screen displaying the meager information about the target named Jungjin, both understood that they were entering a highly risky gamble. Lee Bangyu loudly proclaimed that they had no other choice but to decisively break in and personally expose the true face of the mastermind. Witnessing that arrogant intrusion, Madame and the bodyguard Jaemin could only widen their eyes in utter shock mixed with extreme fear. Hidden behind the conical hat, Seonha gently raised her fan to cover half of her face, her crimson eyes radiating a cold bloodlust that signaled an impending massacre. Madame gasped in amazement when she saw with her own eyes the extraordinary appearance of the young girl standing right in front of her. She couldn't help but marvel at the clear crimson eyes exuding a bizarrely sharp intelligence and astuteness. The powerful woman continued to praise the porcelain-smooth white skin and silk-like glossy hair of this rare commodity. Every gesture and posture of Seonha was incredibly composed, exuding a calm and deeply proud demeanor. Madame approached with a scrutinizing look upon noticing that the girl absolutely refused to bow in submission despite standing before the one in power. She screamed in excitement that it had been a very long time since she last saw such a masterpiece possessing the qualities of a top jising. However, Madame still silently noted that Seonha's body seemed too fragile to endure brutal punishments. She reached out to lift the young girl's chin to look deeply into the eyes radiating a massive invisible pressure. That gaze was judged to be overly stubborn and rebellious, seemingly impossible to easily present for entertaining guests. Gently touching Seonha's lips with a threatening air, she asserted that every jising here was molded by her own wicked hands. Madame joyfully declared that she would take full responsibility and turn the young girl into the most illustrious top jising in the history of the Sangcheng region. She casually took a drag from her pipe and then ordered her subordinates to take Seonha to the physical conditioning room to begin the grueling molding process. Just as the giant bodyguard was about to act, a black-gloved hand decisively grabbed his bicep, stopping any intention of trespassing. Lee Sang coldly stared straight at Madame and affirmed that her filthy schemes would absolutely have no effect on him. With a razor-sharp gaze, the delivery boy boldly proclaimed that since he was the one who brought the girl here, no one was allowed to touch her without his permission. The bodyguard Bayan Jaemin glared in astonishment mixed with fury at the audacity of the delivery brat daring to challenge the Jising house's authority. He groaned silently in pain upon realizing an absurd strength was crushing his arm, leaving him stunned to realize his opponent was far from simple. Roaring furiously in rage, the giant channeled all his strength into a lightning punch aimed straight at Lee Sang's head to finish off the insolence. A shocking boom rang out as Jaemin was slammed into the cracked ground along with curses of despair following a lightning-fast counterattack. Madame stood dead silent in sheer terror, the pipe on her lips nearly falling as she witnessed her most capable bodyguard humiliatingly defeated. A sudden steel fist slammed down, shattering the ground. The giant Jamin coldly questioned if his opponent understood the consequences of daring to challenge a high-ranking bodyguard like him. Li Bangyu casually brushed the dust off his shoulder, his face showing blatant indifference as he admitted he had no concept whatsoever of the ridiculous rules the man was talking about. Bayan Jamin glared with murderous intent, pointing a finger at the sunflower emblem on his chest and asserting that in this place, the strongest is the one who holds everything. He continued to emphasize that this badge was the proof of a bodyguard's supreme power, something countless fools had died trying to seize. Finishing his words, the giant decisively lunged forward with terrifying speed, growling a challenge that if his opponent truly wanted it, he should use his strength to take it. An explosive clash erupted, shaking the entire space as two absurd streams of power collided head-on, marking the beginning of an unyielding purge. Li Bangyu pensively raised his hand to his chin in thought, as if silently measuring his opponent's endurance limit right in the midst of the fierce battle. Taking advantage of an opening when the bodyguard's attack missed by a hair, the orange-clad delivery boy quickly dodged to the side with the reflexes of a professional assassin, his hand thrust decisively into his pocket to build momentum, preparing for a decisive move intended to completely end the arrogance of the man before him. A lightning punch was thrown, driving straight into Jamin's body, sending the giant flying backward like a paper doll before Li Bangyu's overwhelming strength. Madame glared in sheer amazement, unable to believe what she had just witnessed as her most capable bodyguard was swiftly taken down. Li Bangyu, with a nonchalant face, held the newly seized sunflower badge in his hand and calmly asked if he just needed to take it like this and be done. He continued in a highly sarcastic tone, asking back whether he needed to actually wear the badge on himself or not. A space-shaking crash rang out as Li Bangyu stood tall, while the giant bodyguard Bayan Jamin lay flattened on the ground in a state of exhaustion. Madame stood dead silent, her eyes widening as she stared straight at the stranger with extreme skepticism and fury. She growled, questioning both of them, asserting that they were definitely not locals. Meanwhile, Li Bangyu maintained his relaxed demeanor, coldly admitting that their secret had been completely exposed in front of Madame. He turned to ask Xionghe with a teasing look whether that meant they would have to finish off this old woman as well. Madame waved her hand arrogantly, declaring that she didn't care at all about the true purpose of the two intruders. She parted her clothes to reveal a scar on her chest and affirmed that they had just dared to take away the Gidong Xiabang mark, the symbol of absolute power in the Songchangdong red light district. Madame gently placed her calloused hands on her skirt, coldly asserting that the most important thing right now was the reality that had just occurred. Li Sang looked bewildered as she vaguely hinted at a truth they were about to face. The delivery boy screamed in terror seeing Madame suddenly tear off her outer garments to reveal bulging muscles and bandages wrapped tightly around her body. She calmly declared that although old, she was still a Jising, and this was the physical form of someone who had lost the man of her life. Li Sang frantically waved his hands, rejecting her proposal to submit, only wishing this bizarre woman would vanish from his sight. Xionghe, with a cold gaze, stepped forward, directing a razor-sharp look straight at Madame. She decisively demanded to know if the woman knew the whereabouts of the one hiding under the name Jungjin. The young girl's crimson eyes bored deeply into her opponent, bluntly suspecting whether the person standing before her was Jungjin or not. Madame remained silent for a moment, her eyes showing a profound unpredictability in the face of these tough questions. A sinister smile suddenly bloomed on the powerful woman's lips as she asserted that she had seen through the real reason the two of them had come here. Madame knelt in a deeply defiant manner, coldly affirming that they would absolutely receive no answers from her. She continued to clearly explain that she herself was not Jungjin and was currently entirely clueless about that woman's hiding place. However, she still revealed a crucial clue that Jungjin was definitely around here and only top-tier Jising had the chance to behold her face. Xionghe slightly narrowed her crimson eyes in deep thought upon hearing the title of top-tier Jising, a concept that seemed still quite unfamiliar. Those were the masters likened to the queens of all flowers, individuals possessing outstanding talents and an aura that overwhelmed every patron. And standing at the very pinnacle of them all was Jungjin, the queen who was always the focal point of envy and brutal conspiracies. Someone who was both hated to the bone but simultaneously received absolute reverence from the entire Jising world in the red light district. Madame lowered her voice to deliver a final warning that both those girls and their bodyguards possessed terrifying power, Anyone daring to plunge in face first would only find death. Seonha and Lee Sang quietly turned their backs and walked away under Madame's brooding gaze, officially delving deeper into the devil's lair. The young girl briefly glanced at her partner, and coldly affirmed that surely by now he understood exactly what he needed to do next. Lee Sang clenched his fists with fierce determination, asserting that they would continue sweeping through everything until the top-tier Jising finally showed themselves. Seonha agreed with her teammate's sharp judgment. She also wanted to end everything quickly so she could soon find something to fill her grumbling, hungry stomach. The scene shifted to a highly eerie guest house area in Sangchangdong, where red lantern lights blanketed a deeply deadly atmosphere. A man lay motionless amidst the rubble, a testament to the violently explosive raid that had just taken place inside this room. Lee Sang without hesitation picked up a scattered flower on the floor, an action serving as an unspoken declaration of war sent to those hiding in the shadows. The delivery boy decisively raised his phone, using the camera to record evidence of the spoils just harvested after the battle. He muttered complaints, feeling like he had taken down dozens of roadblocks, and if only he had known how fierce the situation would be, he would have quoted a VIP order price instead of just a regular thug clearing job. Lee Sang stood with crossed arms amidst the ruined scene looking utterly fed up, while Seonha calmly reviewed information on her phone. He spoke up, asking his partner when exactly these top-tier Jising would finally appear to face him. Just then, a girl in Jising attire named Miwon suddenly appeared, screaming furiously asking if they knew the horrific chaos they were causing at this particular location. Seonha raised her phone high with a deeply resolute look, asserting that she already held everything clearly in the palm of her hand. The Jising revealed she had pinpointed the 10 most suspicious locations in Sangchangdong, places with illicit cash flows and the clearest signs of money laundering. Seonha deduced that if these places required such strict security systems along with high profits, there was a very high chance they were intimately connected to the top-tier Jising. The young girl coldly demanded the restrained person to quickly confirm whether her deductions were correct, as they still had many other places to check. Miwon screamed in panic that even though she didn't know who sent these intruders, they would absolutely never stand a chance against that woman. She raised both hands to the sky in a surrendering posture, fearfully warning that the status of that woman was something no one was allowed to violate. Right at that moment, Miwon's phone suddenly vibrated incessantly, shattering the tense silence in the room. Seonha glanced at the phone screen, which displayed an emergency call notification from top-tier Jising, a name that made the atmosphere suffocating. Miwon sweated profusely, her face distorted in fear as she frantically pleaded that she was completely uninvolved in this. She desperately cried out that it wasn't her and tried to deny all responsibility before this call pushed her to a dead end. The bald bodyguard was forced into silence when a strange hand clamped his mouth shut with a humiliating gag. A mysterious voice from the other end of the line rang through the phone, coldly confirming that this was indeed a special summons signal. The woman on the other end of the line gave a definitive order to take this girl straight to the VVIP room immediately. She snapped the phone shut with a decisive click, her eyes still fixed on the blood-soaked schemes surfacing in her mind. The Jising looked down at the person tied on the floor, coldly asking if they were finally ready to reveal the exact location of that VVIP room. The captive could only let out muffled grunts in despair while gagged, entirely powerless in this life-or-death situation. The scene shifted to the luxurious hotel building in Sangchangdong, where bright lantern lights covered up the crimes inside the basement. The door to the VVIP room vaguely showed a regal and mysterious aura, where the darkest secrets of the upper class were concealed. Inside the extravagant room, a man casually poured strong liquor into a glass, immersed in a corrupted enjoyment. He inhaled the mesmerizing scent of the liquor, throwing flirtatious words at the woman named Hyenji who was serving him. The assemblyman holding the glass of wine in his hand sarcastically questioned who even talks about the separation of powers in this day and age. He smugly questioned how the country would develop and who would truly love it if politicians only knew how to suppress one another. Deputy Minister of Interior Kim Myongju laughed heartily in agreement, remarking how wonderful it is when all branches of power look in the same direction. Chief Prosecutor Gong Cheolji, with a face of extreme excitement, yelled out that they were not discussing separation but rather the unification of all three branches. He also delightedly praised how the slogan of unifying the three branches sounded so catchy and deeply powerful. The whole group raised their glasses and drank it all down, enjoying the hedonistic atmosphere in the private room reeking of corruption and authority. At this moment, Huang Gai, a highly cunning top-tier Jising, appeared with a sweet smile, asking the guests to strike a cool pose for a photo. The Jising pulled out multiple phones at once, requesting each person to strike a pose for an individual picture using their own device. Huang Gai smiled brightly, urging everyone to smile wide to capture this memorable moment in this game. She suddenly threatened coldly that they all knew the outcome if anyone dared to betray. If just one fell, all would share the exact same disastrous fate. In the VVIP room reeking of lust, the fat official embraced the Jisiangs and jerked his chin, ordering Huang Gai to serve the esteemed guests thoroughly. Huang Gai turned around with a deeply suggestive smile at his condescending command. The fat guest pointed at the empty seat next to him, gruffly demanding to know why Miwon, whom he had requested, still hadn't appeared. Suddenly, the phone in Huang Gai's hand vibrated. She slightly flinched and looked at the screen with a surprised expression. Huang Gai maintained her calm smile, politely asking the official to wait patiently for a moment. Right at that moment, the silhouette of a strange girl appeared at the door. Huang Gai immediately apologized to the guest for the delay. She calmly announced that Miwon was caught up with an unexpected matter and could not come to serve drinks. Instead, she introduced Seonha in a modernized hanbok, the young girl with crimson eyes blazing with bloodlust stepping in as a substitute. At a luxurious swimming pool, the top Jising Zhao Ke smirked while reading the news that the old female manager and her bodyguard had been easily defeated by a stranger. Zhao Ke lounged leisurely on a pool float, coldly mocking that the old hag had clung to that seat for too long, and being eliminated was inevitable. Zhao Ke burst into delighted laughter, belittling the old Jising house madam for being unable to keep a decent bodyguard despite her age. She continued to express her relief that from now on she wouldn't have to see that detestable face anymore. Zhao Ke suddenly retracted her satisfaction, growling to assert that the woman's bodyguard was actually very strong. She glanced at the phone screen and announced that 3 locations had already been swept through. Zhao Ke stated they believed the culprits behind this were the exact group on the priority list. She held up the screen showing images of Li Sang and Seonha, confirming that both had made it onto the blacklist. Zhao Ke coldly ordered the person opposite her that it was time for them to get to work. Right at that moment, her face hardened as she yelled, demanding to know who the person opposite her was to dare boldly enter this place, and what right they had to give her orders. The man standing with another Jising calmly replied that even though they didn't really like each other, now was not the time to maintain their pride. Zhao Ke screamed in absolute fury, demanding the other person not to hide but immediately reveal themselves to face her. From beneath the pool's surface, a heavily muscled man named Oh Hyun-soo suddenly emerged unexpectedly amidst Zhao Ke's calling. Oh Hyun-soo revealed his muscular physique, his razor-sharp eyes full of bloodlust under the crystal-clear water. He slightly moved his limbs, preparing for a surprise attack from beneath the water's surface. With terrifying speed, Hyun-soo lunged upward like a predatory beast, revealing his overwhelming strength. Hyun-soo surfaced right in front of the 2 strangers, his face devoid of any emotion. Just as he surfaced, he indifferently complained that if he had held on a bit longer, he would have reached his 20-minute soaking milestone. Hearing this, Zhao Ke flew into a rage, yelling at him that at a time like this he still cared about that, and demanded he quickly retrieve her wallet immediately. The 2 strangers stood quietly observing, instantly recognizing this was Chongwol and her Gedung Siabang bodyguard. Hyun-soo casually grabbed the pool railing, softly speaking up to mock the identities of the 2 uninvited guests. Hearing the sarcasm, the other bodyguard immediately spat water in deep contempt, showing extreme irritation at the opponent's attitude. Amidst the tense atmosphere, the strangers suddenly stood up, the long hem of their robe fluttering softly with sheer pride. He spoke up politely, claiming to be in the same profession and wanting to reason with the opponent. He casually demanded that Zhao Ke and the accompanying man should know what's good for them and leave here immediately. Zhao Ke looked disdainful, sarcastically asking back if they were being overly confident in themselves. She asserted that the bodyguard by her side was naturally strong enough to balance any situation. Both strangers quietly responded with a cold attitude, confirming they knew well that the relationship between the 2 sides was far from friendly. They emphasized that this was not the time for either of them to maintain personal pride and argue any further. In a fleeting moment, the other bodyguard suddenly lunged forward, throwing a massive punch, creating a powerful, explosive collision. Chongwol stood there, keeping a cold tone as she ordered Zhao Kei to know her limits and not make her bother with any further insolence. Zhao Kei burst into manic laughter, cursing the opponent as a crazy woman and mocking her for disappearing without a trace all this time only to show up now asking for help. Chongwol glared at the opponent with piercing cold eyes, loudly ordering them to get lost before things got worse. The accompanying bodyguard tried to defuse the situation by calling Zhao Kei's name and suggesting they both calmly sit down and negotiate. Showing no fear, Zhao Kei disdainfully called the man Appa, then fiercely demanded the other person not to hide but quickly reveal themselves. She put on her sunglasses, dropping a spine-chilling threat that if they dared utter one more word, she would slaughter them all, sparing no one. The muscular bodyguard stood with his arms crossed, his entire body tensed up like a solid block of steel, ready to plunge into a bloody battle. Chongwol stood facing him, her eyes clearly showing displeasure while still maintaining a terrifyingly calm demeanor. The Jising briefly glanced at the bodyguard, signaling to her accomplice that it was time to retreat from this situation. The deafening sound of a car engine echoed as a luxury vehicle abruptly rolled away right in front of the mansion. The car sped off, leaving a desolate scene at the main gate with traces of the chaos that had just occurred. Sitting inside the car, the man sighed, admitting that it was better they dropped the idea of asking for help from the likes of those Jisiangs. Chongwol stared blankly into space, silently remarking that she was having a bad premonition exactly like what had happened 2 years ago. The bodyguard sitting in the front looked through the rearview mirror, confirming that it was indeed since 2 years ago, when the delivery boys started flooding in like a ferocious wave. Chongwol's gaze turned razor-sharp. She affirmed that she was smelling the thick stench of blood in the air. Outside, along the tree-lined street, a small car glided swiftly past an ancient temple. A silent atmosphere blanketed the moss-covered tiled roofs, a place harboring the deadly secrets of the upper class. Suddenly, a familiar figure in an orange outfit appeared, riding a bicycle straight toward the mansion's main gate. The mysterious delivery boy wore a fully enclosed helmet, casually whistling while pedaling as if completely unaware of the lurking danger. The striking orange protective gear and the delivery bag on his back created the unmistakable look of a daring rookie. The dry ring of the bicycle bells sounded before the large gates, shattering the tranquil atmosphere of the entire area. The air seemed to thicken inside the VVIP room. Sionha, in her bright red hanbok, had officially revealed herself before the utterly bewildered officials. Sionha stood perfectly straight, her calm face replying that she had only come here as a stand-in for the other girl. The fat guest blanked out, stuttering to ask what a stand-in meant upon seeing the strange girl appear so suddenly. In a dark corner of the room, the actual requested girl was bound hand and foot and gagged, struggling hopelessly. In a fit of excitement, the fat man brushed off all suspicions and waved his hand, ordering his subordinates to seize and use this girl immediately. He stepped closer to Sionha, his face despicable as he asked for her identity, and wanted to know what skills she had to serve him. Right then, he froze as an inexplicable sense of unease suddenly rushed into his mind after taking a close look at the girl's face. He roughly reached out and tightly squeezed Sionha's chin, narrowing his eyes to scrutinize every feature on her face. His eyes widened in horror as he realized this girl was a perfect replica of the late Chairman Song Jianqiu's daughter. A man sitting nearby sneered, sarcastically saying that perhaps he had seen her at the funeral of her late father 2 years ago. He nodded sickeningly, both gripping Sionha's chin tightly and tossing out flirtatious remarks about the girl's beauty from years ago. He looked at his palm and wondered aloud if she was even still alive. What a pity. He continued muttering that he had always wanted to see her again someday, and decided that this girl in front of him would temporarily act as her replacement. The fat man spread his arms wide, ordering the girl to think of him as her father and come closer to show some seduction. Sionha, with a calm face, just quietly looked at him and replied that the girl she seemed to have. The young girl serenely interrupted, stating that she would offer her lord a poem. Hearing this, the fat man chuckled delightfully, asking back if it was a poem. He showed interest and agreed to hear it right away. Sionha began reciting haunting verses about crimson flowers sinking deep beneath the wall, where their fragrance lures passing guests astray. She continued humming, offering her lord a cup of wine to wash away all sorrows. The fat man listened in a trance, muttering a wish for tonight to stretch on forever without ever seeing the dawn. Just as he finished speaking, Sionha decisively splashed the cup of strong liquor right into his face, cutting short the despicable man's moment of pleasure. The sweating assemblyman widened his eyes in shock as he felt the atmosphere suddenly shift in an extremely dangerous direction. Suddenly, Seonha in her Jising attire delivered a lightning slap that caught him off guard and sent his glasses flying off his face. Witnessing that terrifying scene, the bodyguards and those present in the room could only drop their jaws in utter bewilderment. Seonha slightly raised her hand and coldly asked if he truly understood the deep hidden meaning behind that poem. The Jising looked down with deep contempt, loudly declaring that its true meaning was that today she would beat him to a pulp. Standing right next to her, the Jising Niwon could not hide her terror when facing Seonha's crimson eyes full of bloodlust. Despite trembling, Miwon's hand still secretly tightened around the secret weapon carefully hidden under her hanbok. She decisively drew a short sword and screamed in a vicious tone that she would immediately punish this arrogant brat on the spot. Miwon lunged forward madly with bloodshot eyes, channeling all her strength into a fatal stab to finish off her opponent. Facing that feeble resistance, Seonha slightly smirked and challengingly asked back who exactly she was daydreaming about defeating. The shattered glasses lay isolated on the floor, accompanied by a deeply defiant sneer. The fat man put his glasses back on while flashing a perverted smile, affirming that he was eagerly looking forward to what was about to happen. Witnessing that brazenness, the Jising Niwon could only stand in stunned silence, her eyes clearly revealing her bewilderment. Seonha briefly glanced over and coldly remarked that thoroughly understanding the preferences of the clients was a necessity. She firmly asserted that it was essentially an introductory lesson every Jising must memorize by heart to survive. The space suddenly dialed back to the past, where Seonha stood alone in the middle of a funeral hall wearing a dark hanbok. The hypocritical officials pretended to wipe away tears, dropping heavily sarcastic words of pity for her late father. With crimson eyes blazing with hatred, she silently recalled that the funeral that year had dragged on for 3 full days and nights. Standing before the stream of mourners, Seonha affirmed she had secretly investigated the background of every single person, sparing no one. She stared intently at the condolence book and loudly declared that she had etched the full identities of all those present deep into her mind. Scraps of clothing and leather belts fell scattered across the wooden floor, signaling a blood-soaked purge was about to begin. Seonha decisively swung the belt, creating sharp, wind-tearing cracks to assert her power. Facing her were the perverted bodyguards, laughing brazenly and casually revealing their lecherous nature. The young girl coldly raised her makeshift weapon high and loudly challenged to see who wanted to be the first to get knocked out. The scene suddenly shifted to the majestic door of the VVIP room, a place harboring the dark secrets of the upper class. A blond young man with a carefree demeanor gently brought his hand to his chin, pondering the unusual things currently happening. He stood quietly in front of a food stand named Jising Bunsik, silently evaluating the extreme extravagance of this place. With eyes full of skepticism, the orange-clad delivery boy could not hide his annoyance looking at the completely absurd price menu. He loudly complained about the shop's cutthroat prices and casually demanded that the owner give a discount since he planned on ordering a lot. Immediately, he received a heaven-shaking smack on the head accompanied by the woman's furious yelling for daring to call her an old hag. The tteokbokki lady loudly asserted that this eatery was originally meant only for upper-class guests willing to spend money like water. The blond young man frowned, silently thinking that if he left right now, it would be even harder to approach Lady Song Seonha. The woman smirked with deep underlying meaning, remarking that a far from ordinary source of energy was radiating from the young man. She casually suggested that instead of using cash, he could use that very strength to pay for this extravagant meal. Licking her lips profoundly, the woman affirmed that in the Sangchangdong district, there are always countless different ways to settle a bill. The young man's eyes widened in sheer shock, constantly wondering why this bizarre woman would make such a crazy proposal. Instantly, a thick stack of cash was slammed down on the counter to extinguish all pointless arguments. The bodyguard casually sat down and decisively asked the owner to serve the usual dish as always. The woman warmly welcomed the regular customer with a radiant smile and asked them to wait patiently for a brief moment. The blond young man quietly observed all movements around him with highly skeptical eyes regarding a hidden trap. The blond young man fell into a pensive silence, his eyes narrowing in skepticism as he closely observed his opponent. His gaze fixated on the vibrant flowers wrapping around the collar of the strange martial officer standing opposite him. He silently concluded that the person before him emitted an extremely dangerous aura and was definitely no amateur. The martial officer suddenly raised a hand, making a firm signaling gesture to grab everyone's attention. With the identity of Song Yip-soo, he loudly requested the shop owner to also thoroughly take care of this guest's meal. The blond young man couldn't help but be surprised and silently grateful, believing that people willing to pay for a meal were all good folks. Song Yip-soo suddenly held up 3 fingers and directly stated that he had 3 questions needing immediate answers. Having satisfied his hunger, the young man casually nodded, accepting the martial officer's exchange proposal. Hidden beneath the brim of his conical hat, Yip-soo asked in a low voice about the true identity of the person he was risking his life to serve. Amidst the tense atmosphere of the eatery, the young man casually revealed that it was a Jisseong named Hossein. The blond young man slightly narrowed his eyes, silently thinking the word serve seemed a bit of an exaggeration since he was the one leading the girl around everywhere. His eyes locked onto the vibrant flowers on Song Yip-soo and deduced that the opponent must have also taken down quite a few bouncers just like him. Amidst a table full of delicious food, Yip-soo in a low voice brought up the rumors about a stranger continuously attacking the Jisseongs and bodyguards lately. The martial officer tilted his head scrutinizingly, directly interrogating whether the young man in front of him was actually involved in that incident. The young man still casually chewed his grilled meat and gave a highly ambiguous denial, while the image of his father suddenly flashed in his mind. Song Yip-soo suddenly raised his hand pointing straight across, loudly demanding that he admit his true identity right here and now. The eyes hidden beneath the conical hat became razor-sharp as Yip-soo pressed him on whether he truly intended to be a professional bodyguard until the very end. Facing the pressure from the martial officer, the delivery boy narrowed his eyes with determination and prepared to deliver an incredibly firm affirmation. Right after that, Song Yip-soo suddenly launched himself away with terrifying speed, leaving behind a hazy trail of white smoke in the middle of the eatery. Ignoring his opponent's haste, the young man quietly enjoyed the last delicious bite on his skewer to conclude the mysterious encounter. Song Yip-soo unexpectedly unleashed a wind-tearing attack that forced the blond young man to brace himself and block it by a hair's breadth. The martial officer stepped back with a profound look, coldly asserting that his opponent had dared to lie on all 3 previous questions. The delivery boy smirked in challenge and loudly declared that from now on he would officially treat him as an enemy. Right then, the tteokbokki shop owner suddenly flew into a rage, screaming and cursing the group for daring to cause a ruckus in her eatery. Upon receiving the thick stack of cash, the woman immediately changed her attitude and cheerfully invited the guests to feel free to fight and eat at the same time. The blond young man quietly observed his opponent with a highly pensive face, as if secretly re-evaluating the flow of the battle. Clicking his tongue with regret, he decisively threw the skewer forward and announced that he would yield it to Yip-soo. Raising both hands high to show conciliation, the young man loudly remarked that the martial officer's speed and accuracy far exceeded the level of the previous delivery boy. He silently recalled a bloody lesson from his past, admitting that if he kept an arrogant attitude while fighting barehanded, his wrists would be severed. His eyes became incredibly resolute along with an affirmation that despite being slightly embarrassed, he still had to bravely acknowledge reality. The blond young man quietly pulled out the sharp skewers, silently recalling the advice not to let meaningless pride ruin the job. He calmly chewed the last piece of meat and told himself that he needed to act like a true professional right now. With a reckless demeanor, the young man defiantly raised the iron skewers to prepare for a new purge. Song Yip-soo frowned slightly in suspicion, coldly questioning whether the opponent truly considered this farce to be professional. The martial officer decisively drew his sword and growled, asserting that such a cheap weapon was never worthy of facing his blade. The delivery guy stood from afar and affirmed that a true professional must know how to quantify an opponent's value, and he was only worth $5. Wasting no time, Song Yip-soo dashed forward with a powerful wind-tearing sword strike aimed straight at the enemy's weak point. A clash erupted between the razor-sharp sword and the simple iron skewers, creating sparks that lit up the entire room. With the reflexes of a top-tier assassin, the blond young man channeled all his strength into his hands to block Yip-soo's fatal attack. The young man suddenly froze in shock seeing the iron skewer in his hand completely destroyed. Song Yip-soo gently channeled his energy, his eyes glinting with a sharp, highly focused gaze on his opponent. The martial officer suddenly unleashed a wind-tearing sword strike, forcing the blond young man to brace himself to defend. Lee Bangyu maintained a calm demeanor, his hands quietly twirling the crude weapon with calculation. Yip-soo coldly growled, asserting that all efforts to resist were now far too late. He poured all his killing intent into a lightning-fast slash, shouting that the opponent would pay with regret. Despite the suffocating pressure, the blond young man smirked slightly, asking what the opponent was babbling about. The furious guard charged with terrifying speed, his razor-sharp sword continuously creating deadly cuts. Yip-Su stepped back profoundly, coldly questioning whether the young man had enough power to back up that arrogance. Suddenly, the young man's foot decisively stomped firmly on the opponent's sword right on the ground. The martial officer could only widen his eyes in utter shock, panicking as he asked himself when the opponent had made his move. The martial officer braced himself, his eyes burning with killing intent, boring deep into the arrogant fool standing right in front of him. The blond young man glided like the wind, leaving the opponent's sword strike as nothing but an aimless streak of light in the air. Smirking slightly, Li Bangyu casually remarked that the martial officer's attack distance was completely off compared to his calculations. He stood there leisurely and pointed out a fatal opening right at the opponent's flank, leaving Song Yip-Su in absolute shock. The guard gritted his teeth in humiliation, bitter for having let the young man treat him to tekbaki, and screamed his comrades' names in despair. The young man coldly demanded the leader step up to take a fatal punishing blow on behalf of his subordinate. The sharp sound of footsteps echoed dryly as the young man decisively turned his back to proceed deeper into the restricted area. His black-gloved hand decisively made an authoritative gesture toward the VVIP room. Bangyu's eyes suddenly became razor-sharp and intensely focused, ready to face the horrific events to come. Facing that suffocating pressure, the Jising Mi-won braced herself, suppressing her anger, and prepared for an uncompromising purge. Mi-won gritted her teeth in humiliation, her face burning with fury upon witnessing the absolute dominance of her opponent. Seonha looked down coldly from above, decisively ordering all those groaning to shut their mouths immediately. She stood majestically on the backs of the defeated and growled, asking who had given them permission to make a sound. Seonha's glowing red eyes emitted a tremendous invisible pressure, making the atmosphere in the room suffocating. Mi-won quietly approached with scrutiny, coldly stating that she had finally met the one known as the number one Jising. She smirked slightly and hurled malicious insults, aimed straight at the young woman's ignorant arrogance. Mi-won continued to mock that the opponent had used her beauty to bewitch the officials, making it difficult to deal out punishment. She furiously screamed in outrage, unable to believe she was being despised this much by a nameless nobody. Despite all the venomous words, Seonha decisively stomped her foot hard to assert absolute control over the battlefield. The Jising coldly turned to look at Mi-won and boldly declared that from this moment on, she would begin asking interrogation questions. Seonha coldly threatened her opponent to carefully consider her testimony, and not foolishly play tricks in front of her. She pointed at the caller named James and affirmed that it was the very thing that would make their revered masters taste pain. Standing in the middle of the room full of death, Seonha boldly declared she would level this restaurant if any commotion occurred in a place originally profiting off the pain of others. The young woman's glowing red eyes bored deep into the enemy's mind, coldly demanding her to fully comprehend those horrific consequences. Seonha interrogated Mi-won with a growl, decisively ordering her to reveal the exact hiding place of the one known as Jungjin. Responding to that coercion was Mi-won's maniacal smile as she dared to call her a brat and questioned whether this was a threat. Without a single wasted word, Seonha's hand decisively pressed hard on the mysterious remote control to activate the punishment. Immediately, the guards wearing the collars screamed in sheer agony, repeatedly demanding to know why they were being treated this way. Piteous cries for help echoed as they continuously complained about an unbearable itching sensation and the suffocation that was slowly squeezing the life out of them. Faced with Seonha's brutality, Mi-won finally had to submit and screamed in acceptance, revealing the truth to escape the nightmare. Mi-won frantically screamed, questioning whether Seonha was truly insane enough to want to take the life of one of the noble lords. Facing the threat of not leaving here alive, Seonha's glowing red eyes remained completely calm and accepted the trade-off. The Jising slightly turned her head, thinking to herself that if she could purge these filthy men with her own hands, she was willing to pay any price. Seonha continued to corner Mi-won with an ironclad threat, demanding that she immediately reveal the whereabouts of the one known as Jungjin. Suddenly, an earth-shattering explosion shook the entire space, completely cutting off the highly tense interrogation between the two. Amidst the hazy dust and smoke, the martial officer Song Yip-Su was forced to kneel on the floor in an incredibly pathetic and painful state. He cried out apologetically and begged for his master's forgiveness for letting a surprise attack happen right before his eyes. Mi-won widened her eyes in astonishment, unable to believe that her revered lord was defeated so swiftly. Meanwhile, Seonha quietly directed her razor-sharp gaze toward the figure that had just proudly walked out from the rubble. The delivery guy in the orange shirt appeared mysteriously amidst the white smoke, making the young woman exclaim the name Lee Sang in astonishment. The pitch-black helmet gradually emerged amidst the eerie pink smoke, signaling the appearance of a major figure. Breath reeking of killing intent exhaled from behind the visor covering his face, making the surrounding atmosphere suffocating. The observer's gaze zeroed in on the mysterious circular symbol meticulously embroidered right above the left chest of the orange suit. That was the signature mark of the Fight Delivery Organization, something that any criminal would be terrified to see.